Hey guys, tonight you begin a journey into one of history's most intimate and emotionally intense archives. A collection of letters so passionate, so tender, and so emotionally raw that when scholars first discovered them in dusty attic trunks and family archives, they debated whether such expressions of love between women could possibly be real, or whether they were reading something they weren't meant to understand. You are going to read over the shoulders of women who poured their hearts onto paper, writing to their dearest female friends in language that sounds to modern ears unmistakably romantic. Declarations of love and devotion and physical longing that challenge everything you thought you knew about the 19th century, and about the emotional lives of women who lived in corsets and drawing rooms and worlds that supposedly had no space for the feelings they expressed so freely in their private correspondence. Before you dive into these forbidden archives of female friendship and possibly something more, hit that subscribe button. It really helps continue creating these bedtime history stories for you. Where are you right now? Are you tucked in bed scrolling through your phone, perhaps thinking about your closest friendships and what they mean to you? Are you relaxing somewhere private where you can listen to stories about love and friendship that defy easy categorization? Tonight, dim those lights, get comfortable, and let's travel back to the 1800s to read the actual words that women wrote to each other, words that were never meant for our eyes, but that reveal truths about female friendship, love, desire, and the complexity of human connection that still resonate powerfully today. What if you were told that some of the most passionate love letters ever written in the English language were written by women to other women, and that these letters were not hidden or destroyed, but were often read aloud at family gatherings, copied into diaries, and treasured by the families who preserved them? What if you learned that in the 19th century, before modern categories of sexual identity existed, women routinely wrote to their female friends in language that declared eternal love, described physical longing, promised lifelong devotion, and expressed jealousy when their beloved friends paid attention to others? What if you discovered that what we now might call romantic relationships between women were often accepted, even celebrated, as long as they were framed as romantic friendships, a specific cultural category that allowed women to love each other intensely without threatening the social order? According to research by Professor Lillian Faderman from California State University, whose groundbreaking work Surpassing the Love of Men examines female relationships from the 16th to 20th centuries, the concept of romantic friendship between women was widely accepted in the 18th and 19th centuries as a noble, even ideal form of female relationship. Professor Faderman analyzes hundreds of letters, diaries, and published works that document these intense emotional and sometimes physical relationships between women, relationships that were considered compatible with heterosexual marriage and that were not categorized as deviant or abnormal until medical discourse in the late 19th century began to pathologize female same-sex desire. The letters you'll read tonight, according to Professor Faderman, reveal a world where women's capacity for deep emotional and physical connection with each other was acknowledged and often encouraged as preparation for marriage, or as a supplement to it, creating a space for female intimacy that modern categories of sexual identity don't quite capture. Think about that for a moment. You are going to spend tonight reading actual love letters between women, exploring the words they wrote in moments of passion, longing, joy, jealousy, and devotion, understanding the contexts in which these letters were written and what they reveal about the women who wrote them and the women who received them. This isn't going to be just a collection of pretty friendship notes, though friendship is certainly part of the story. This is going to be an exploration of desire and devotion, of women who used their pens to express feelings that their world both allowed and constrained, of relationships that were simultaneously accepted and impossible, public and private, innocent and intensely erotic, depending on how you read them and what framework you use to understand them. Let me tell you about Emily Dickinson, because her letters to Susan Gilbert, who became Susan Dickinson when she married Emily's brother Austen, are among the most passionate and complex examples of 19th century female correspondence. Emily Dickinson, now recognized as one of America's greatest poets, lived most of her adult life in seclusion in her family home in Amherst, Massachusetts. But her inner life, as revealed in her letters and poems, was anything but isolated. According to research by Professor Martha Nell Smith from the University of Maryland, whose work on Dickinson's correspondence examines her relationships with women, Emily Dickinson wrote hundreds of letters to Susan Gilbert across their lifelong relationship. Letters that express love, desire, devotion, and erotic longing in language that is unmistakably intense, even if its exact meaning remains debated by scholars. In one letter from 1852, before Susan married Austin Dickinson, analysed by Professor Smith and preserved in the Dickinson archives, Emily wrote to Susan, "Susie, forgive me, darling, for every word I say foy. My heart is full of you, none other than you in my thoughts. Yet when I seek to say to you something not for the world, words fail me. If you were here, Fida, and oh, that you were, my Susie, we need not talk at all. Our eyes would whisper for us, and your hand fast in mine. We would not ask for language." This letter, according to Professor Smith, demonstrates Emily's struggle to express in words what she felt for Susan, the inadequacy of language to capture the intensity of her emotions, and the suggestion that physical presence and touch, your hand fast in mine, would communicate better than words what she wanted to express. Another letter from Emily to Susan, written in 1852 and analysed by Professor Smith, becomes even more explicit in its expression of longing. "I have thought of it all day, Susie, and I fear of but little else, and when I was gone to meeting it filled my mind so full, I could not find a chink to let the worthy minister's words in, and I seem to be with you all the time. I am so impatient to see you, Susie. I could not wait another hour, but must say something to you as a sort of comfort, and you will think I am crazy, I fear, but you must bear with me. I miss you, mourn for you, and walk the streets alone. I go to bed and I dream of you thiften. I wake and you are not there, and you are coming. But the streets seem very long and very wide, and I should like to see you, Susie Fuzzy Finning. I would like to see you this evening. I miss my own dear Susie, very much indeed. Your absence insane me. No one will believe what I say because I am alone." This letter, according to Professor Smith, reveals Emily experiencing what she describes as near insanity from Susan's absence, unable to concentrate on church services because her mind is full of Susan, dreaming of her at night, walking the streets alone, mourning her absence. The language is that of a lover, separated from a beloved, expressing physical longing. "I should like to see you this evening," and psychological distress at the separation. Whether Emily and Susan had what we would now call a romantic or sexual relationship is something scholars still debate. But what is clear from the letters, according to Professor Smith, is that Emily felt and expressed emotions for Susan that were as intense and all-consuming as any romantic love, and that she felt no need to hide these feelings or frame them as anything other than what they were. Now, let me tell you about a very different kind of female relationship documented in letters, the passionate friendship between Sarah Ponsonby and Eleanor Butler, known as the Ladies of Llangollen, whose romantic partnership scandalised and fascinated British society for over 50 years. According to research by Professor Elizabeth Maver from the University of Edinburgh, whose biography of the Ladies of Llangollen examines their relationship, Sarah and Eleanor met in Ireland in the 1770s, and finding themselves both unhappy with their family situations and both deeply attracted to each other, made the radical decision to elope together in 1778, setting up a household together in Wales, where they lived in devoted partnership for the rest of their lives. The Ladies of Llangollen, according to Professor Maver, became famous throughout Britain and Europe as exemplars of romantic friendship, visited by literary figures and aristocrats who admired their devotion to each other and their creation of an idealized rural life together. Their journals and letters, analyzed by Professor Maver, document a relationship that was openly acknowledged as a romantic partnership, with the two women living as a married couple in all but name, sharing a bed, managing their household together, and expressing in their writings a devotion to each other that was lifelong and exclusive. In Eleanor Butler's journal from 1785, analysed by Professor Maver and preserved in the National Library of Wales, Eleanor wrote about Sarah, "My beloved and I rose at 7. We breakfasted, read, walked, worked. The day was beautiful. My beloved sat in the window seat, the light falling on her hair, and I thought, as I have thought 1,000 times, that there is no sight on earth more beautiful to me than she is. 20 years we have now lived together, and every day my love for her grows stronger. I cannot imagine life without her. I would not wish to imagine it. She is my companion, my friend, my life's partner, my everything." This journal entry, according to Professor Maver, captures the lady's domestic routine and Eleanor's deep emotional attachment to Sarah, expressed in language that is simultaneously tender and matter of fact, treating their partnership as the central fact of their lives. Another entry from Sarah Ponsonby's journal from 1790 and analysed by Professor Maver reveals the jealousy and possessiveness that could characterise these intense friendships. "A certain lady called today and was far too attentive to my beloved. I found myself quite out of sorts watching them converse so intimately. My beloved assures me there is nothing in it, that I am her only true companion, but I confess to feelings of jealousy that I am not proud of but cannot help. I want all her attention, all her affection, all her time. I am selfish in my love for her, and I know it, but I cannot change how I feel." This entry, according to Professor Maver, reveals the emotional intensity and possessiveness of Sarah's love for Eleanor, the same kinds of jealousy and insecurity that characterize any romantic relationship. Let me tell you about the correspondence between Margaret Fuller and Caroline Sturgis, two intellectuals in the American transcendentalist movement of the 1840s, whose letters reveal a passionate friendship that Fuller herself struggled to define and understand. According to research by Professor Charles Capper from Boston University, whose biography of Margaret Fuller examines her relationships, Fuller was one of the most brilliant and unconventional women of her time, an editor, critic, and early feminist who conducted intense emotional relationships with several women, including Caroline Sturgis, whom she met in the late 1830s. Fuller's letters to Sturgis, preserved at Harvard University and analysed by Professor Capper, express love, desire, confusion, and frustration in turns, revealing a woman trying to understand and articulate feelings that her culture gave her no clear framework for comprehending. In a letter from 1840, Fuller wrote to Sturgis, "I love you, Caroline, with a love that sometimes frightens me in its intensity. When I am with you, I feel complete in a way I never feel with anyone else. When we are apart, I think of you constantly, wondering what you are doing, wishing I could be with you. Is this wrong? I do not think it is, and yet I have no name for what we are to each other. You are more than a friend, but what more? I do not know. I only know that I love you and that this love is the most real thing in my life." This letter, according to Professor Capper, shows Fuller grappling with the inadequacy of language and social categories to describe what she feels for Sturgis. She knows the feeling is love. She knows it is more than conventional friendship, but she has no framework to name or understand it beyond those recognitions. The question, "Is this wrong?" suggests Fuller's awareness that her feelings might be considered inappropriate by some, but her immediate answer, "I do not think it is," shows her refusing to condemn or suppress what she feels. Another letter from Fuller to Sturgis from 1841 and analysed by Professor Capper becomes more physically explicit in its expression of longing. "I want to hold you in my arms, to feel your body against mine, to kiss you as I have kissed no one else. I want to sleep beside you and wake with you. I want to know you in every way it is possible for one human being to know another. Does this shock you? I hope not. These are my true feelings, and I will not pretend they are anything less than what they are. If you cannot accept this, then tell me now, and I will try to master my feelings, though I do not know if I can. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then let us not deny it or diminish it by calling it mere friendship when it is so much more. This letter, according to Professor Kappa, is remarkably direct in expressing physical desire, with Fuller explicitly stating her wish to hold, kiss, and sleep with Sturgis. Whether Fuller and Sturgis acted on these desires is unknown from the historical record, but what is clear, according to Professor Kappa, is that Fuller felt them intensely and chose to express them in writing, trusting Sturgis to understand and perhaps reciprocate. Now let me tell you about the phenomenon of smashing in 19th century American women's colleges, a practice where female students developed intense romantic attachments to each other that were openly acknowledged and generally tolerated by school authorities, as long as they didn't interfere with studies. According to research by Professor Helen Lefkowitz Horowitz from Smith College, whose work on women's education examines college culture, smashing referred to the practice of one female student developing a crush on, or smash on another female student, pursuing her with gifts, love notes and attention, and sometimes establishing what amounted to a romantic relationship that might include hand-holding, kissing, and sharing beds. Letters between college women engaged in smashes, preserved in various college archives and analysed by Professor Horowitz, reveal the conventions and rituals of these relationships. In a letter from 1873 from a Vassar College student to her smash, preserved in Vassar archives and analysed by Professor Horowitz, the student wrote, "My dearest darling, I cannot concentrate on my studies for thinking of you. When I see you in the dining hall, my heart races. When we pass in the hallway and you smile at me, I feel as though I could fly. Last night when you allowed me to sit beside you at the evening lecture, I was in heaven. Would you do me the honour of accepting this ribbon as a token of my devoted affection? And might I hope that you will wear it so that all may see that you have a devoted admirer? I remain your most faithful and loving servant." This letter, according to Professor Horowitz, follows the conventions of courtship literature of the time, with the writer positioning herself as a suitor pursuing a beloved, offering gifts, and hoping for public acknowledgement of their connection. The language is that of romantic courtship, and yet, according to Professor Horowitz, such letters were often read aloud to friends, shared in groups, and treated as amusing examples of youthful passion, rather than as evidence of deviant sexuality. Another letter from 1878, from a Wellesley College student to her friend describing her smash, analysed by Professor Horowitz and preserved in Wellesley archives, reveals the physical dimension of these relationships. "My roommate has developed the most intense smash on a senior. They spend every free moment together, walking arm in arm around the campus, sitting with their arms around each other in the library. And last week I woke in the night to find my roommate's bed empty and discovered her asleep in her beloved's room, the two of them curled up together like spoons. I confess I am a bit jealous, though whether of my roommate for having such a devoted lover or of her beloved for receiving such devotion, I cannot say. I would not mind having someone look at me the way she looks at her darling." This letter, according to Professor Horowitz, casually describes behaviour that included sleeping together and physical affection, treating it as normal college life rather than as scandalous. The writer's confession of jealousy and her wish for a similar relationship suggests that smashes were enviable, desirable relationships that many young women hope to experience, not shameful secrets to be hidden. Let me tell you about correspondence between Anna Seward and Honora Sneed in late 18th century England, because their letters and the poems Seward wrote about Honora reveal a love so intense and so openly expressed that it challenges modern assumptions about what was acceptable in the past. According to research by Professor Claudia Johnson from Princeton University, whose work on 18th century literature examines female friendship, Anna Seward was a celebrated poet in her time, known as the Swan of Lichfield, who conducted an intense emotional relationship with Honora Sneed. Her adopted sister, and who wrote numerous poems and letters expressing her love for Honora in terms that were unmistakably romantic. In a letter from 1770, when Honora was planning to marry, analysed by Professor Johnson and preserved in the British Library, Seward wrote to Honora, "You tell me you will marry Mr. Edgeworth, and I must somehow find a way to bear this knowledge. Though it tears my heart to pieces. You say you love me still, that marriage will not change your feelings for me. But how can I believe this when marriage means you will belong to him in ways you can never belong to me? You will share his bed, bear his children, make your life with him, and I will be relegated to the position of friend, a word that cannot begin to express what you are to me. I have loved you with my whole heart since we were girls. You are the other half of my soul. How can I endure seeing you give yourself to another when I want all of you for myself?" This letter, according to Professor Johnson, expresses jealousy, possessive love, and grief at Honora's impending marriage in terms that make clear Seward's feelings were not merely friendly, but romantic and even erotic, with the reference to sharing beds suggesting Seward's awareness of the physical dimension of marriage that would exclude her from Honora's life. Seward's poems about Honora, published during her lifetime and analysed by Professor Johnson, are even more explicit in their expression of physical and emotional love, describing Honora's beauty in sensual terms and expressing the poet's desire for exclusive possession of her beloved's attention and affection. When Honora died in 1780, according to Professor Johnson, Seward wrote an elegy that described her grief in terms that exceeded conventional mourning for a friend. She wrote, "She is gone, and half my soul is gone with her. I cannot imagine continuing to live in a world that does not contain her. The sun rises and sets, the seasons change. Life goes on around me, but I am frozen in the moment of her death, unable to move forward, unable to accept that she is gone forever. I loved her more than life, and now that she is dead, what reason do I have to continue living?" This elegy, according to Professor Johnson, was published and widely read, with contemporary readers accepting it as a legitimate expression of grief for a deeply loved friend, even though its emotional intensity suggests a love that went beyond conventional friendship. Now let me tell you about the correspondence between Charlotte Cushman and Emma Stebbins, because their relationship in the mid-1/9th century represents one of the most openly romantic female partnerships of the era, lived publicly in European and American society, with relatively little scandal. According to research by Professor Lisa Merrill from Hofstra University, whose biography of Charlotte Cushman examines her life and relationships, Cushman was one of the most famous actresses of the 19th century, celebrated on both sides of the Atlantic, and she conducted a series of romantic relationships with women that she and her partners understood and lived as marriages, even though they could not be legally recognized as such. Cushman's letters to Emma Stebbins, a sculptor whom Cushman met in Rome in 1857, and with whom she lived in partnership until Cushman's death in 1876, are preserved in various archives and analysed by Professor Merrill. In a letter from 1858, Cushman wrote to Stebbins, "My darling wife, for that is what you are to me even if the law does not recognise our union. I write to tell you how much I miss you during this brief separation. My bed feels empty without you beside me. My days feel incomplete without your presence. I count the hours until we are reunited and I can hold you in my arms again. You are my companion, my partner, my beloved, my everything. I love you with a love that is as strong and true as any marriage vow, and I will love you until my dying breath." This letter, according to Professor Merrill, explicitly uses the language of marriage, my darling wife, our union, marriage vow, to describe the relationship, acknowledging that the law doesn't recognise it, but asserting its validity and permanence nonetheless. Cushman's letters frequently reference sharing a bed with Stebbins, holding her in her arms, and other physical intimacies, treating these as normal expressions of their committed relationship. According to Professor Merrill, Cushman and Stebbins lived together openly, received visitors as a couple, travelled together, and were generally accepted by their social circle as partners. even though everyone understood the romantic and likely sexual nature of their relationship. Another letter from Cushman to Stebbins from 1860 and analysed by Professor Merrill discusses the challenges of living as a female couple in a world structured around heterosexual marriage. Sometimes I feel the injustice of our position keenly. We are as married as any husband and wife, as devoted, as committed, as bound to each other for life. And yet we cannot marry legally, cannot inherit from each other automatically, cannot be recognised as next of kin if one of us falls ill. We must live in the shadows of the law, even as we live openly in society. But I would not trade what we have for any legal marriage to a man. I would rather have you without legal recognition than have any man with all the legal rights in the world. You are my true spouse, and nothing and no one can change that. This letter, according to Professor Merrill, shows Cushman's clear-eyed awareness of the legal and social limitations of female partnerships, while also asserting the validity and primacy of her relationship with Stebbins over any legally recognized heterosexual marriage. The phrase, "we must live in the shadows of the law, even as we live openly in societies," captures the paradox of female romantic partnerships in the 19th century, socially tolerated and even celebrated as romantic friendships, but legally invisible and unprotected. Let me tell you about the concept of Boston marriage, a term that emerged in late 19th century New England to describe long-term cohabiting relationships between two women who live together independently of men. According to research by Professor Esther Rothblum from San Diego State University, whose work on Boston marriages examines these relationships, the term originally referred to financially independent women, often professionals or women with inherited wealth, who chose to make their lives with female partners rather than marrying men. These relationships were generally accepted in their communities as practical arrangements between spinsters or widows, though many of them were also romantic and likely sexual partnerships. Letters between women in Boston marriages, preserved in various New England archives and analysed by Professor Rothblum, document the domestic intimacy and emotional intensity of these partnerships. In a letter from 1889 from one woman to her female partner, who was away visiting family, analysed by Professor Rothblum and preserved at the Schlesinger Library, the writer described her loneliness. "My dearest companion, the house feels unbearably empty without you. I find myself listening for your footsteps on the stairs, expecting to see you in your favourite chair by the window, reaching for you in bed at night, and finding only emptiness. I miss your laugh, your voice, the way you hum while you work, the way you read to me in the evenings. I miss everything about you. Please come home soon. I need you here with me." This letter, according to Professor Rothblum, describes a domestic partnership characterized by shared routines, physical intimacy, sharing a bed, and deep emotional dependence, all the markers of a committed romantic relationship. The casual reference to sharing a bed suggests that this was their normal sleeping arrangement, not an occasional occurrence. The writer's description of missing her partner's presence in every aspect of daily life reveals how completely their lives were intertwined. Another letter from a woman in a Boston marriage from 1895 and analysed by Professor Rothblum discusses the decision to commit to such a partnership. "You asked me if I am certain about our decision to make our lives together, to set up a household as partners, to commit ourselves to each other for life. I am more certain of this than I have been of anything. I do not want to marry a man and become his property, subject to his will, bearing his children whether I wish to or not. I want to make my own choices, control my own life, and share that life with someone I choose freely, someone who is my equal and my companion. That someone is you. If society calls us spinsters and pities us for our unmarried state, let them. We will know the truth, that we have chosen each other, that we have built a life together based on mutual love and respect, and that we are happier than most married women could ever hope to be." This letter, according to Professor Rothblum, articulates a deliberate choice to opt out of heterosexual marriage in favour of a female partnership, motivated both by attraction to the specific woman and by a desire to avoid the legal and social subordination that marriage to a man would entail. The writer's confidence that she and her partner will be happier than most married women suggests an awareness that their relationship offers something that heterosexual marriage does not: equality, mutual choice, and freedom from patriarchal control. Now let me tell you about the letters of Mary Woolley to Jeanette Marks, because their 50-year partnership in the early 20th century represents the continuation of 19th century romantic friendship traditions into a more modern era when such relationships were beginning to be pathologized by medical and psychological authorities. According to research by Professor Anna Mary Wells, whose biography of Mary Woolley examines her presidency of Mount Holyoke College and her relationship with Marks, Woolley and Marks met in 1895 and fell deeply in love, beginning a relationship that would last until Woolley's death in 1947. They lived together for most of those years, with Marks working as a professor of English, while Woolley served as one of the most influential women in American higher education. Woolley's letters to Marks from the early years of their relationship, preserved in the Mount Holyoke College archives and analysed by Professor Wells, express passionate love and physical longing. In a letter from 1900, Woolley wrote to Marks during a period of separation, "My precious darling, I am aching for you tonight. I want to hold you and kiss you and tell you how much I love you. I want to feel your arms around me and your body against mine. I want to sleep with you and wake with you and spend every moment with you. Being apart from you is torture. I love you more than words can express, more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. You are everything to me." This letter, according to Professor Wells, is unambiguous in its expression of physical desire and romantic love, using language that clearly indicates a relationship that was sexual as well as emotional. Woolley felt comfortable expressing these feelings in writing, trusting that Marks would understand and reciprocate, which the evidence suggests she did. According to Professor Wells, Marks wrote equally passionate letters to Woolley, creating a correspondence that documented a deeply loving and physical relationship that both women understood as the central fact of their lives. But as the 20th century progressed, according to Professor Wells, Woolley and Marks found themselves in an increasingly hostile environment for female partnerships. The rise of sexology and psychoanalysis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had created new categories of sexual inversion and lesbianism that pathologized same-sex desire as mental illness. Women who in the 19th century might have openly conducted romantic friendships without censure now faced social condemnation and professional consequences if their relationships were understood as sexual. Woolley and Marks never publicly acknowledged the nature of their relationship as anything other than friendship, even as they continued to live together and share their lives completely. In a letter from 1937, analysed by Professor Wells and written when Woolley was in her 70s, and both women had lived together for over 40 years, Woolley wrote to Marks, "My dearest, I have been thinking about our life together, all these decades we have shared, and I am filled with gratitude. We have built a life that is rich and full and meaningful. We have loved each other faithfully and truly. We have supported each other through every joy and every sorrow. We have been partners in the deepest sense of that word. I know that the world does not understand or approve of what we are to each other. I know that there are those who would condemn us if they knew the truth of our love. But I do not care what they think. I only care that I have spent my life with you, and that whatever time I have left, I will spend it with you as well. You are my beloved, my companion, my life's partner, and nothing can change that." This letter, according to Professor Wells, shows Woolley reflecting on their long partnership with satisfaction and defiance, acknowledging that society would condemn their relationship if they were more open about it, but asserting that their love is valid and valuable regardless of social approval. The phrase, "the truth of our love," suggests Woolley's awareness that they have had to hide or downplay the sexual dimension of their relationship to protect themselves professionally and socially, but that privately they know what they are to each other. Let me tell you about the correspondence between Edith Somerville and Violet Martin, who wrote together under the name Somerville and Ross, and whose literary partnership was also a deeply committed personal relationship. According to research by Professor Gifford Lewis, whose biography of Somerville and Ross examines their collaboration, Edith and Violet met in 1886 and immediately formed an intense bond, beginning a literary partnership that produced some of the most popular novels of late 19th and early 20th century Ireland. Their letters to each other, written during periods when they were separated, reveal the emotional intensity and romantic nature of their relationship. In a letter from 1888, analysed by Professor Lewis and preserved in family archives, Edith wrote to Violet, "I cannot work without you. I try to write, but the words feel dead on the page because you are not here to bring them to life. Writing with you is like dancing with a perfect partner, each of us anticipating the other's moves, completing each other's thoughts, creating together something neither of us could create alone. But it is not just the writing I miss. I miss you every moment of every day. I miss your voice, your laugh, the way you look at me when I say something ridiculous. I miss walking with you, sitting with you, simply being in the same room with you. Come back to me soon, my darling. I am not whole without you." This letter, according to Professor Lewis, describes both the creative partnership and the emotional relationship between Edith and Violet, treating them as inseparable aspects of the same bond. The phrase, "I am not whole without you," expresses a level of emotional dependency and romantic attachment that goes beyond professional collaboration or conventional friendship. Edith's letters frequently use endearments like "my darling," "my beloved," and "my dearest," when writing to Violet, treating their relationship as primary in her life. After Violet's death in 1915, according to Professor Lewis, Edith was devastated and continued to write letters to Violet, which she kept in a private journal. In one such letter from 1916, analysed by Professor Lewis, Edith wrote, "My darling, it has been a year since you left me, and I am no more reconciled to your absence than I was on the day you died. I talk to you constantly, though I know you cannot hear me. I feel your presence beside me when I write, guiding my hand, whispering suggestions. I sleep on my side of the bed, leaving your side empty for you, hoping somehow you will return to fill it. I know this is madness, but I cannot help it. You are my partner, my beloved, my other self, and without you, I am only half alive. I will love you until the day I die, and beyond, if there is anything beyond." This letter, according to Professor Lewis, reveals the depth of Edith's love for Violet and her inability to move on after Violet's death. Edith lived for another 34 years after Violet died, never forming another close relationship, continuing to write sometimes, claiming that Violet's spirit was guiding her and keeping Violet's memory alive through her letters and journals. The relationship had been, for Edith, the central fact of her life, and losing it was a loss she never recovered from. Now let me tell you about letters written by African American women to each other in the 19th century, because the historical record of female same-sex relationships is overwhelmingly white. And yet, black women also conducted intense emotional relationships with each other that were documented in letters and diaries. According to research by Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin from Columbia University, whose work on black women's literature examines female relationships, the archive of black women's letters is smaller and more fragmented than that of white women due to historical circumstances, including slavery, poverty, and the systematic destruction of black family papers. But what survives reveals that black women also formed deep romantic friendships and possibly sexual relationships with each other. Letters between Addie Brown and Rebecca Primus, two free black women in Connecticut in the 1860s, are among the most remarkable documents of black female romantic friendship. According to research by Professor Karen V. Hansen from Brandeis University, whose book No Kisses Is Like Yours examines the Brown-Primus correspondence, Addie and Rebecca conducted an intense emotional and possibly sexual relationship documented in hundreds of letters written during the Civil War era, when Rebecca was teaching freed slaves in Maryland and Addie remained in Connecticut, working as a domestic servant. In a letter from 1861, analysed by Professor Hansen, and preserved at the Connecticut Historical Society. Addie wrote to Rebecca, "Dear Rebecca, I must tell you that I dreamt of you last night and the night before. You was with me, you was laying down by me. I thought that I could not content myself without giving you one sweet kiss. Oh, Rebecca, it seemed so natural. I waked up, but you had gone. Still, I felt happy, for I had kissed you and you had kissed me. I cannot tell you how much I love you. No one knows but you. I wish that I could see you. It seems so long since I saw you." This letter, according to Professor Hansen, explicitly describes physical intimacy. Lying together kissing expresses deep love and reveals that Addie has no one else to confide in about her feelings except Rebecca. The dream described is clearly a wish fulfillment dream, recreating the physical intimacy that Addie desires and misses. The secrecy suggested by "no one knows," but you indicates Addie's awareness that her feelings for Rebecca might not be understood or accepted by others, even as she expresses them freely in her private letters to Rebecca. Another letter from Addie to Rebecca from 1863, and analysed by Professor Hansen, becomes even more physically explicit. "My dear, dear friend, I can't get you out of my mind this evening. I must write to you. If I could only be with you this evening, to have one sweet kiss. I want to see you and talk with you so bad. I would give anything to speak to you tonight, if I could just lay my head on your bosom and tell you all that is in my heart. Rebecca, I love you. I love you more than I can tell you. I think of you always awake and asleep. Last night I had such sweet thoughts of you. I imagined you and I were together. You know what I mean? My darling, I cannot write it, but you know, my whole soul is yours." This letter, according to Professor Hansen, strongly suggests a sexual dimension to Addie and Rebecca's relationship, with the phrase, "You know what I mean, my darling. I cannot write it," but you know indicating shared intimate knowledge of physical acts that Addie feels she cannot describe explicitly in writing, but that she trusts Rebecca to understand. The reference to Addie's whole soul belonging to Rebecca expresses complete devotion and suggests that this was not a casual friendship, but a relationship that Addie understood as the most important in her life. Let me tell you about the changing social and medical context that transformed how female same-sex relationships were understood, because the letters we've been reading were written in a world that interpreted female intimacy very differently than we do today. According to research by Professor Lillian Federman, by the late 19th century, the rise of sexology and the medicalization of sexuality began to create new categories of sexual deviance that included female same-sex desire. Sexologists like Richard von Kraft, Ebbing and Havelock Ellis studied and classified various forms of what they called sexual inversion, including women who loved women, and they generally pathologized these desires as mental illness or biological abnormality. This medicalization of female same-sex desire, according to Professor Federman, had a chilling effect on romantic friendships, where earlier in the 19th century women could write passionate letters to each other, live together, sleep together, and express deep devotion without being considered deviant or abnormal. By the early 20th century, such behaviour was increasingly viewed through a medical lens as evidence of lesbianism, which was understood as a pathological condition requiring treatment, or at least social isolation. Women who in previous generations might have openly conducted romantic friendships now had to hide such relationships or face social and professional ruin. Letters from the early 20th century, according to Professor Federman's research, show women becoming more cautious and coded in their expressions of love for other women, aware that their letters might be read by hostile eyes and used as evidence against them. The freedom of expression that characterized earlier romantic friendship correspondence was lost as women learned to police their own feelings and words, creating a historical rupture between the 19th and 20th centuries in how women loved each other and how they documented those loves. Now, let me tell you about how these letters were preserved and discovered, because the story of their survival is itself revealing about how families and archives dealt with evidence of female same-sex love. According to research by Professor Martha Vicinus from the University of Michigan, whose work on Victorian sexuality examines archival practices, many letters between women were preserved by family members who understood them as innocent expressions of romantic friendship, a socially acceptable category that allowed them to keep the letters without admitting to anything scandalous. When scholars in the 20th century began discovering these letters in attics and archives, and recognizing their sexual and romantic content, families sometimes reacted with shock and attempted to restrict access or destroy materials. Professor Vicinus describes cases where descendants of women who had conducted romantic friendships destroyed letters when they realized the sexual implications, wanting to protect their ancestors' reputations. Other families donated letters to archives, but insisted on restrictions that prevented researchers from studying them for decades. And still other families proudly preserved letters, understanding them as evidence of deep female friendship, but remaining willfully blind to any sexual dimension, insisting that their ancestors were simply good friends who happened to live together and write love letters to each other. The letters that survive, according to Professor Vicinus, represent only a fraction of what was written, a fragmentary archive that nonetheless reveals the intensity and complexity of female emotional and erotic lives in the 19th century. Every letter that survives is a small miracle, a message from the past that someone chose to preserve, even when it might have been safer to destroy it, a testament to the power of love letters to outlast the lives and times of those who wrote them. Let me tell you about how to read these letters, because modern readers face interpretive challenges that the women who wrote them might not have imagined. According to research by Professor Sharon Marcus from Columbia University, whose work on female same-sex relationships examines the concept of surface reading, we should resist the temptation to impose modern categories of sexual identity on 19th century relationships. The women who wrote these letters did not understand themselves as lesbians in the modern sense, because that category did not exist in their time. They understood themselves as engaging in romantic friendships, or as loving other women, or simply as expressing the deep affection they felt, without necessarily categorizing themselves by sexual identity. At the same time, according to Professor Marcus, we should not dismiss these relationships as just friendships or deny the erotic and sexual dimensions that many of them clearly had. The challenge is to read these letters on their own terms, understanding the context in which they were written, while also acknowledging what they reveal about same-sex desire and love. Whether a particular relationship was sexual in the physical sense is often unknowable from the historical record, but what is clear is that the emotional intensity, the expressions of exclusive devotion, the jealousy and longing and passion documented in these letters represent forms of love that deserve to be recognized as such, regardless of whether they fit neatly into modern categories. The women who wrote these letters, according to Professor Marcus, were navigating complex emotional and social terrain, expressing feelings that were simultaneously accepted as romantic friendships and transgressive as same-sex desire. Simultaneously public, many letters were shared with families and friends, and private, some contents were coded or kept secret. Reading their letters requires us to hold multiple interpretations simultaneously, to acknowledge both the historical specificity of romantic friendship as a cultural category and the transhistorical reality of women loving women in ways that look, sound, and feel like romantic love. Tonight, as you drift off to sleep, I want you to appreciate the freedom you have to love whom you choose, to express your feelings openly or privately as you prefer, to define your own relationships and identities without having to fit them into narrow social categories that may or may not capture your truth. The women whose letters you've read tonight lived in a time when the very language to describe same-sex love between women was limited or non-existent, when social structures made it nearly impossible to live as an openly lesbian couple, and when medical authorities were beginning to pathologize the very feelings these women expressed so beautifully in their correspondence. And yet, despite all these constraints, these women loved each other. They wrote letters that declared their love, expressed their desire, promised their devotion, and created relationships that sustained them through their lives. They found ways to be together, to build households together, to create partnerships that gave their lives meaning, even when those partnerships had no legal recognition or social validation. They loved each other with a courage and creativity that still inspires, and their letters survive as testimony to the enduring human need to love and be loved, regardless of gender, regardless of what society permits or forbids, regardless of whether the world understands or approves. Sweet dreams, dear friends, and may you wake tomorrow with renewed appreciation for the power of love in all its forms, for the courage it takes to express what you feel, even when you lack the language or the social permission to do so, and for the women who came before us who loved each other so intensely that their words still move us nearly 2 centuries later. May you honour their memory by loving authentically, by refusing to diminish or hide your feelings to make others comfortable, and by understanding that love between women has always existed, has always been powerful and real and transformative, even when it was called friendship, even when it was medically pathologized, even when it was socially invisible. Sleep well, knowing that you are the inheritor of a legacy of female love and devotion that stretches back through centuries, that the freedom to love women openly and proudly was fought for and claimed by women who expressed their love in secret letters and coded words, and that every time you love another woman freely and without shame, you honour the women who loved before you, but could not speak as freely as you can. Let me tell you about the letters between Frances Power Cobbe and Mary Lloyd, because their mid-Victorian relationship represents another variation on female romantic partnership, one where the two women lived together for over 30 years in what Cobbe explicitly called a marriage. According to research by Professor Sally Mitchell from Temple University, whose work on Victorian women examines female partnerships, Frances Power Cobbe was a well-known feminist writer and animal rights activist who met Mary Lloyd in 1864 and almost immediately established a domestic partnership with her that lasted until Lloyd's death in 1896. Cobbe's letters to Lloyd during their brief separations, preserved in the Huntington Library and analysed by Professor Mitchell, expressed devotion, longing, and domestic intimacy. In a letter from 1870, Cobbe wrote to Lloyd, "My own darling, I am counting the hours until I can return home to you. Home is not a place. It is wherever you are. These days away from you feel wasted, empty, meaningless. I go through the motions of my work, attend the meetings I must attend, fulfill my obligations. But all the while I am thinking of you and wishing I were with you instead. Tonight I will sleep alone in a strange bed and wish with all my heart that you were beside me where you belong. Come back to me in my dreams if you cannot be with me in reality. I love you beyond measure." This letter, according to Professor Mitchell, treats their shared domestic life as the centre of Cobbe's existence, with her professional work and public activities merely obligations to be fulfilled, so she can return to what really matters, her life with Lloyd. The reference to sleeping alone and wishing Lloyd were beside her suggests they normally shared a bed, treating it as so routine that separation from that norm is what requires comment. Cobbe's description of home as wherever you are, rather than a physical place, emphasises that Lloyd herself, not their house or location, is what makes Cobbe feel at home. After Lloyd's death in 1896, according to Professor Mitchell, Cobbe wrote extensively about their relationship in ways that made clear she understood it as a marriage. In an essay published in 1894, 2 years before Lloyd's death, analysed by Professor Mitchell, Cobbe wrote, "I have been blessed to share my life for 30 years with a companion whose love has sustained me through every trial, whose presence has made every joy more joyful, and whose partnership has given my life a richness and depth it would never have had without her. We have built a home together, shared our resources, supported each other's work, cared for each other in sickness, and loved each other with a constancy that I believe equals or exceeds most legal marriages. If the law does not recognize our union, that is the law's failure, not ours." This essay, according to Professor Mitchell, was published during Cobbe's lifetime, and widely read, with Cobb apparently feeling secure enough in her social position to publicly acknowledge the nature of her relationship with Lloyd, or at least to acknowledge it in terms that those who wanted to understand would understand, while those who preferred to see it as conventional friendship could continue to do so. The phrase, "If the law does not recognize our union," explicitly frames the relationship as a union that should be recognized, a marriage in all but legal fact. Now, let me tell you about the correspondence between George Eliot, Mary Ann Evans, and Edith Simcox, because it reveals the complications and pain that could result when romantic feelings between women were not reciprocated, or when one woman was unavailable for partnership. According to research by Professor Kathleen McCormack from Florida International University, whose work on George Eliot examines her relationships with women, Edith Simcox was a younger woman who developed an intense romantic and erotic passion for George Eliot in the 1870s. A passion that Eliot acknowledged but did not reciprocate in the same intensity, partly because Eliot was already in a committed relationship with George Henry Lewes. Simcox's diary and letters, analysed by Professor McCormack and preserved at the Bodleian Library, document her unrequited love for Eliot with painful honesty. In a diary entry from 1877, Simcox wrote, "I went to her today and found her alone. I sat at her feet and she allowed me to kiss her hand, her dear hand that has written so much beauty into the world. I wanted to tell her that I love her, that I think of her constantly, that I would do anything for her if she would only allow me to be close to her. But I could not find the words, and even if I had, what would be the use? She is devoted to Mr. Lewes. She has made her life with him. There is no room in it for me, not in the way I wish there were. I must content myself with whatever scraps of her attention she can spare me, and be grateful for those, even though my heart wants so much more." This diary entry, according to Professor McCormack, reveals Simcox's awareness that her love for Eliot is hopeless, that Eliot's emotional and domestic life is already completely occupied by her relationship with Lewes, but also Simcox's inability to stop loving Eliot or to settle for ordinary friendship when what she wants is romantic partnership. The physical detail of kissing Eliot's hand suggests that Simcox sought and received at least some physical contact, even if not the full intimacy she desired. In another diary entry from 1878, analysed by Professor McCormack, Simcox wrote even more explicitly about her physical desire for Eliot. "I dreamed of her last night, of holding her in my arms, of kissing her mouth, of touching her body. I woke aching with desire, and with the knowledge that my desire will never be fulfilled. She does not feel for me what I feel for her. She is kind to me, allows me to visit, permits my adoration, but she does not love me as I love her. I am tormented by wanting what I cannot have, by loving someone who will never be mine, but I cannot stop. I would rather have this pain, this hopeless longing, than not love her at all." This diary entry, according to Professor McCormack, describes explicitly sexual dreams and physical desire, making clear that Simcox's feelings for Eliot were erotic as well as romantic. The pain of unrequited love documented in Simcox's diary is the same pain that anyone experiences when they love someone who doesn't love them back with the same intensity, regardless of gender. Simcox's statement that she would rather have this pain than not love her at all captures the paradox of unrequited love. The feeling is simultaneously torment and treasure, something to be endured because the alternative, not loving at all, seems worse. Let me tell you about letters written in girls' schools and academies, because these institutions became important sites for romantic friendships and possibly sexual relationships between young women in the 19th century. According to research by Professor Nancy Sally from the Smithsonian Institution, whose work on women's education examines female relationships in schools, boarding schools and academies, brought together groups of young women in close quarters, away from family supervision, creating an environment where intense emotional and physical relationships could develop. The letters and diaries that survive from these institutions reveal a culture where romantic attachments between students were common, accepted, and even encouraged as preparation for adult female friendship. A letter from 1848 from a student at the Troy Female Seminary in New York, analysed by Professor Sally and preserved in school archives, describes the intensity of school friendships. "My dearest Mary, I write to tell you how much I miss you since you left school. You were my best beloved friend here, the one I shared everything with, the one I told my deepest secrets to. Do you remember how we would slip into each other's beds after lights out and whisper for hours? How we would hold each other when we were homesick or sad? How we promised we would be friends forever and write to each other always? I am trying to keep that promise now. Please write back and tell me that you remember those times as fondly as I do, and that your love for me has not diminished now that we are separated." This letter, according to Professor Sally, describes behaviours that were apparently common and accepted in girls' schools: students sharing beds, holding each other for comfort, forming exclusive friendships characterised by deep emotional intimacy and physical affection. The writer assumes these behaviours and feelings will be understood and reciprocated by her friend, suggesting a shared culture where such friendships were normal and valued. The anxiety about whether the friendship will continue after school reveals the importance these relationships held for the young women involved. Another letter from 1855 from a student at a Massachusetts academy to her friend who had graduated the previous year, analysed by Professor Sally and preserved in private family papers, becomes more explicitly romantic. "Dearest Ellen, I have a new crush, but she can never replace you in my heart. You were my first love, my truest love, and though I am trying to transfer my affections to someone present since you are gone, I know that no one will ever make me feel the way you did. Do you remember the first time you kissed me? Really kissed me, not just a peck on the cheek, but on the mouth. I think of that kiss often. I dream of it. I wish I could feel it again. If you ever return to visit the school, please let me know. I would give anything to see you again, to have just one more evening with you, like the ones we used to share." This letter, according to Professor Sally, explicitly describes romantic and physical elements of the friendship, including kissing on the mouth, and treats the relationship as a first love that subsequent attachments cannot equal. The casual reference to having a new crush suggests that serial romantic attachments to other girls were normal and expected in this school culture, that students moved through a series of intense friendships that had romantic and physical dimensions without this being considered unusual or wrong. Now let me tell you about the challenges of interpreting physical affection in 19th century female friendships, because modern readers often struggle with knowing how to understand references to bed, sharing, kissing, and other physical intimacies. According to research by Professor Karen Listra from California State University, whose work on Victorian intimacy examines physical affection, the 19th century had different norms and meanings around physical contact than we do today. Women routinely shared beds when travelling or visiting, partly out of practical necessity when bedrooms were scarce, but also as a sign of intimate friendship. Kissing between female friends was common and socially acceptable. Women walked arm in arm, sat in each other's laps, and engaged in physical affection that would be considered romantic or sexual in modern contexts, but that Victorians often interpreted as innocent friendship. But, according to Professor Listra, this doesn't mean that all such physical contact was innocent or non-sexual. Rather, the acceptance of physical affection between women created a cultural cover under which genuinely erotic and sexual relationships could be conducted, because observers could interpret the same behaviours as either innocent friendship or sexual relationship, depending on their assumptions and the context. Two women sharing a bed might be entirely platonic friends seeking warmth and companionship, or they might be lovers engaging in sexual activity, and outside observers couldn't necessarily tell which was the case. This ambiguity, according to Professor Listra, was both protective, allowing women who loved each other erotically to conduct their relationships without scandal, and limiting, because it meant that genuinely romantic relationships could be dismissed or minimized as just friendship, even by the women themselves, if they had no framework to understand same-sex desire as real and legitimate. The question of whether specific historical relationships were sexual is often unanswerable, according to Professor Listra, and perhaps not the most important question. What matters is that women loved each other with intensity and devotion, that they built lives and relationships around those loves, and that those loves shaped their identities and their experiences regardless of whether they included genital sexuality. Modern readers focus on whether historical women really had sex with each other, according to Professor Listra, often misses the point. These were complex relationships that defied simple categorization, that existed in a cultural context very different from our own, and that need to be understood on their own terms, rather than forced into modern categories of either platonic friendship or sexual lesbianism. Let me tell you about the role of mourning and grief in preserving evidence of female romantic friendships, because when one woman died, her surviving partner often expressed grief so intense and so prolonged that it became public evidence of the depth of their relationship. According to research by Professor Martha Vicinas from the University of Michigan, whose work on Victorian sexuality examines mourning practices, Victorian culture accepted and even expected intense mourning from women, but the grief expressed by women for their female partners often exceeded conventional bounds and revealed the romantic nature of the relationship to anyone who was paying attention. The case of Mary Hallock Foote grieving for Helena de Kay Gilder is particularly revealing. According to research by Professor Polly Welts-Kaufman from the University of Massachusetts, whose work on Western women examines Foote's life, Mary and Helena conducted an intense romantic friendship in the 1870s and early 1880s, documented in hundreds of passionate letters. When Helena died in 1916, Mary, who was then in her 60s and had been married to Arthur Foote for over 40 years, wrote grief-stricken letters to friends that made clear Helena had been the great love of her life. In a letter from 1917, analysed by Professor Kaufman and preserved at Stanford University, Mary wrote to a friend, "Helena is gone, and I feel as though the best part of my life is over. Arthur is a dear man, and we have had a good marriage, but he was never to me what Helena was. Helena understood me in ways Arthur never could. Helena was my soulmate, my other self, the person I loved most intensely in all my life. I have been grieving for her for over a year now, and I do not think this grief will ever fully pass. How can it, when I have lost the person who meant more to me than anyone else in the world?" This letter, according to Professor Kaufman, explicitly ranks Mary's feelings for Helena above her feelings for her husband, stating that Helena was her soulmate and the person I loved most intensely in all my life, implying that her marriage to Arthur, while good, was emotionally secondary to her relationship with Helena. The fact that Mary felt comfortable expressing this in a letter to a friend suggests she trusted the friend to understand, and perhaps even accept that a woman might love her female friend more intensely than her husband. A possibility that the culture of romantic friendship made conceivable, even if it complicated conventional assumptions about marriage being a woman's primary relationship. Another example of grief revealing the romantic nature of a female friendship comes from the aftermath of Anna Seward's beloved Honora Sneed's death, which we discussed earlier. According to Professor Claudia Johnson's research, when Honora died in 1780, Anna's grief was so extreme and so public that it became scandalous, with contemporary observers commenting that Seward mourned Honora more intensely than most women mourned their husbands. Seward wore mourning clothes for years, refused to enter society, wrote elegies and memorial poems about Honora that were published and widely read, and generally behaved like a widow mourning a spouse, rather than a friend mourning a friend. In letters written in the years after Honora's death, analysed by Professor Johnson, Seward continued to express her undying love for Honora and her inability to move on. In a letter from 1785, 5 years after Honora's death, Seward wrote, "I had a dream of her last night, so vivid that I woke believing she was still alive, and the realization that she is gone forever struck me anew with all the force of fresh grief." 5 years she has been dead, and still I cannot accept it. Still I cannot imagine life without her continuing endlessly like this, empty and meaningless. People tell me I should stop mourning, that 5 years is long enough, that I should return to society and resume my life. But they do not understand. Honora was my life. Without her, I am merely existing, going through motions, waiting for death to reunite us. This letter, according to Professor Johnson, reveals that Seward's grief had not diminished even after 5 years, and that she understood her life as essentially over with Honora's death, just waiting for her own death to reunite them. The intensity of this grief and its duration far exceeded Victorian norms for mourning a friend, making public what Seward's poems and earlier letters had already suggested, that Honora was not merely a friend but the love of Seward's life, the loss of whom was a loss so profound that Seward never recovered from it. Now let me tell you about class differences in how female romantic friendships were conducted and documented, because the archive of letters we've been discussing comes primarily from middle and upper-class women who had the education to write eloquent letters and the leisure to conduct extensive correspondences. According to research by Professor Ellen Ross from Ramelin College, whose work on working-class women examines their lives and relationships, working-class women also formed intense friendships and possibly romantic relationships with each other. But these relationships are much less well documented because working-class women were less likely to be literate, less likely to have privacy for letter writing, and less likely to have their papers preserved by families or archives. What evidence we do have of working-class female friendships, according to Professor Ross, comes primarily from court records, charity organization reports, and middle-class observers' accounts of working-class life. All sources that are filtered through class bias, and that may not accurately represent the women's own understandings of their relationships. Court records, for example, occasionally document cases where two working-class women were living together as a couple, brought to authorities' attention because of some other legal matter, and these records sometimes reveal that the women understood themselves as married or as committed partners. But the records also reflect the legal system's incomprehension or hostility towards such relationships. One case from 1851, documented in London court records and analysed by Professor Ross, involved two women, a seamstress and a laundress, who had lived together for over 10 years, and who referred to each other as wife when questioned by authorities about their living arrangements. The court record notes that the women shared a bed, pooled their earnings, and presented themselves to neighbours as a couple. When asked why they lived together rather than marrying men, one woman reportedly said, "We are married to each other, and we have no need of men." The court, according to Professor Ross, dismissed this statement as ignorance or impertinence, but the women's self-understanding as married suggests that working-class women, like their middle-class counterparts, formed committed partnerships with each other that they understood as legitimate, even if the law did not recognize them. Let me tell you about letters that women wrote defending their relationships when they were criticized or questioned, because not all female partnerships were accepted without challenge. And the defensive letters that survive reveal both the social pressures these women faced and their determination to validate their loves. According to research by Professor Sharon Marcus from Columbia University, some female couples faced criticism from family members who felt that their relationships were too exclusive, too intense, or too unconventional, and the letters written in response to such criticism reveal the women's awareness that their relationships were being judged, and their efforts to frame them in acceptable terms. A letter from 1835 from a woman defending her decision to make her home with a female friend rather than marry, analysed by Professor Marcus and preserved in family papers, responds to apparent criticism from her brother. "You write to express concern about my living arrangement with Miss Sarah, suggesting that I am wasting my life in spinsterhood and should instead seek marriage to a suitable man. I must tell you, dear brother, that I have no interest in marriage to any man. I have found in Sarah a companion whose society pleases me more than that of any man I have ever met. We are happy together, comfortable together, suited to each other in temperament and interests. We have made a home that satisfies us both, and we have no need or desire for male presence to complete our household. I understand that society expects women to marry, but I see no reason to sacrifice my happiness to society's expectations when the life I have chosen brings me such contentment. This letter, according to Professor Marcus, explicitly rejects marriage in favour of partnership with Sarah, framing it as a positive choice for happiness, rather than an unfortunate default for women who couldn't attract husbands. The writer's confidence in defending her choice suggests she felt secure enough in her own judgment, and perhaps in her social position, to resist family pressure to marry. The description of the household as complete without male presence implicitly challenges the assumption that women need men to have full and satisfying lives. Another defensive letter from 1868, analysed by Professor Marcus and preserved at Mount Holyoke College, responds to more explicit accusations. I have received your letter expressing shock at the nature of my friendship with Constance, based apparently on gossip you have heard. I do not know what specifically you have heard or from whom, but I will tell you the truth plainly. Constance and I love each other. Ours is a love as pure and true as any love between man and woman, perhaps purer because it is not complicated by the power imbalances and property concerns that characterize most marriages. We are equals in our partnership, each giving to the other freely, neither subordinated to the other's will. If you or others choose to see something shameful in this, that is your failing, not ours. We will continue to love each other and to live together regardless of gossip or condemnation, because our love is worth more to us than social approval. This letter, according to Professor Marcus, is remarkably defiant, openly acknowledging love between the writer and Constance, explicitly comparing it to heterosexual love, and finding it superior in some respects, and refusing to be shamed or to modify the relationship to satisfy critics. The writer's willingness to be so direct suggests either that she felt secure enough to risk social consequences, or that she had been pushed to a point where she felt she had to openly defend her relationship, rather than pretend it was conventional friendship. The phrase, "our love is worth more to us than social approval," captures the position that many women in romantic partnerships must have felt, that maintaining their relationships was more important than maintaining complete respectability. Let me tell you about regional and national differences in how female romantic friendships were understood and accepted, because the cultural context for these relationships varied significantly across different places and times, even within the 19th century. According to research by Professor Layla Rupp from the University of California, Santa Barbara, whose work on same-sex love examines cross-cultural variations, some cultures and time periods were more accepting of female romantic friendships than others, with factors including religious traditions, legal frameworks, and broader attitudes toward women's autonomy, all influencing whether particular relationships were tolerated or condemned. In the United States, according to Professor Rupp, the antebellum period, roughly 1820 to 1860, was particularly conducive to romantic friendships, with separate spheres ideology emphasizing women's moral and emotional superiority and creating a culture of female intimacy that was celebrated rather than suspect. The many letters written by women during this period expressing passionate love for other women were generally interpreted by contemporaries as evidence of women's capacity for pure spiritual love untainted by base physical desire. This interpretation allowed relationships that were almost certainly sexual to be understood and accepted as spiritual friendships. In Britain, according to Professor Rupp, the situation was somewhat different, with greater class stratification creating different norms for upper-class and working-class women's friendships. Upper-class women had more freedom to conduct romantic friendships because their class position protected them from some kinds of scrutiny, but they also faced greater social pressure to marry advantageously and produce heirs, meaning that their romantic friendships often had to be conducted alongside or after marriages. Working-class women had less freedom in some ways, being more subject to employer and community surveillance, but also more opportunity to form partnerships with other women based on economic cooperation and shared survival needs. In France, according to Professor Rupp, the cultural context for female friendships was shaped by different intellectual and literary traditions, with French Romanticism creating a cultural space for idealized same-sex love that was understood as transcending earthly physical desire. French women's letters to each other from the 19th century, analysed by Professor Rupp, often employ elaborate literary language borrowed from romantic poetry, describing their loves in highly aestheticized terms that emphasized spiritual and emotional connection, while often hinting at physical dimensions that were left artfully unspecified. A letter from 1842 from French writer Georges Sand, Amantine Lucille Aurore-Dupin to actress Marie Dorval, analysed by Professor Rupp and preserved in French archives, demonstrates this aesthetic approach. Monday Ange, my soul flies to you across the miles that separate us, and I feel that our spirits are entwined even when our bodies cannot be together. You are my muse, my inspiration, the embodiment of all beauty and grace. When I write for you, imagining you reading my words and finding in them some reflection of the love I feel for you. This love is beyond the comprehension of those who know only earthly passion. It is a love of souls, pure and eternal, and yet it fills me with longing to be near you, to gaze upon you, to feel the warmth of your presence. This letter, according to Professor Rupp, frames the relationship in spiritual and aesthetic terms, love of souls, pure and eternal, while also expressing physical longing, to be near you, to gaze upon you, to feel the warmth of your presence, creating the ambiguity that was characteristic of how French women expressed same-sex desire. The letter could be read as purely spiritual friendship or as erotic love, depending on the reader's frame of interpretation, and this ambiguity was likely intentional, allowing Sand to express her feelings while maintaining plausible deniability about their physical dimension. Now let me tell you about the letters written by women to other women's husbands after those women died, because these letters sometimes reveal the intensity of female friendships through the grief of the surviving friend, and sometimes through tensions with the widower who might have felt that his wife's female friend was a rival for her affections. According to research by Professor Helena Michie from Rice University, whose work on Victorian marriage examines triangular relationships, the death of a married woman who had maintained an intense romantic friendship sometimes created complex mourning situations where the surviving female friend and the widow competed to claim the role of chief mourner and to assert who had loved the deceased woman most. A letter from 1857 from a woman to her deceased friend's husband, analysed by Professor Michie and preserved in private family papers, reveals these tensions. Dear Sir, I write to express my condolences on the loss of your wife, who was also my dearest friend and the person I loved most in the world. I know you are grieving, as am I, but I must tell you that you did not know her as I knew her. In the years of our friendship, she confided in me things she never told you. I knew her innermost thoughts, her deepest fears, her truest self. You had her as a wife, bound by legal contract and social obligation. I had her as a friend, bound by choice and love freely given. You mourn a wife you possessed. I mourn a beloved I chose. Our griefs are different, and I will not pretend that mine is less than yours simply because the law did not recognize our bond. This letter, according to Professor Michie, is shockingly direct in asserting the female friendship as equal to, or perhaps superior to, the marriage, with the writer claiming deeper knowledge of the deceased woman and characterizing the marriage as based on possession and obligation, while the friendship was based on choice and freely given love. The tone suggests real resentment, possibly based on the surviving friend feeling that the husband had prevented her from being as close to her friend as she wished, or possibly based on jealousy that the husband had legal and social recognition for his relationship while hers was socially invisible. Whether the husband responded to this letter or what he thought of it is unknown from the surviving records. Another letter from 1871 from a widower to his late wife's female friend, analysed by Professor Michie, suggests more acceptance, but also reveals awareness of the intensity of the female friendship. Dear Miss Ellen, thank you for your letter of condolence regarding my wife's passing. I know that you loved her deeply and that she loved you in return. I was sometimes jealous of your friendship, I confess, feeling that she told you things she did not tell me and that you had a claim on her affections that competed with mine. But I also know that your friendship brought her great joy and that she valued you beyond measure. I hope we can comfort each other in our mutual grief, as we are the two people who loved her most and who miss her most profoundly. This letter, according to Professor Michie, acknowledges the husband's jealousy of the female friendship while also accepting it as legitimate and valuable, suggesting a more generous understanding than the first letter revealed. The phrase, "you had a claim on her affections that competed with mine," explicitly recognizes the female friendship as a form of love that was comparable to and competitive with marital love, an unusual acknowledgement for a man of this period to make. The proposal that the widower and the female friend comfort each other in their mutual grief suggests an alliance based on shared love for the deceased woman, a recognition that they have more in common as mourners than they have differences as husband and friend. Let me tell you about the role of poetry in expressing female same-sex love, because many women used poetry as a form that allowed more emotionally intense expression than prose, and that had literary precedence for passionate declarations between friends. According to research by Professor Paula Bennett from Southern Illinois University, whose work on 19th century women's poetry examines love poems between women, American women poets routinely wrote love poetry to and about other women, publishing these poems in magazines and newspapers and having them read aloud at literary societies, with the poetic form providing a degree of aesthetic distance that made such expressions acceptable when similar declarations in prose might have been more scandalous. Emily Dickinson's poems to Sue Gilbert, for example, which we've discussed earlier in terms of letters, were also written as poems that Dickinson sent to Sue or included in letters. According to Professor Bennett, one poem from 1852 reads, "One sister have I in our house, and Tovey in our house, and one a hedge away. There is only one recorded, there is only one recorded, but both belong to me." This poem, according to Professor Bennett, distinguishes between Dickinson's biological sister Lavinia, who lived in our house, and Sue, who lived a hedge away, next door after Sue married Dickinson's brother, asserting that both women are sisters to Dickinson, but only one Lavinia is recorded as such in official family relations, while Sue belongs to Dickinson in an unofficial but equally real relationship. Another Dickinson poem to Sue, analysed by Professor Bennett, is even more explicit in its expression of love and desire. "I am sorry for the dead today. It is such congenial times. I'd old-fashioned, faithful, fashioned things suitia, which is peculiar times. But when they love again sovereignty, I'll let them know." Too Late, this poem, according to Professor Bennett, imagines death as a state where love as intense as what Dickinson feels might be possible, but then asserts that by the time the dead can love again, it will be too late, because Dickinson's love for Sue is happening now, in life, not reserved for some imagined afterlife. Other women poets also used poetry to express love for women. Alice Dunbar Nelson, an African-American poet and educator in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, wrote poems to women she loved that were published and read without apparent scandal, according to research by Professor Akosha Gloria Hull from the University of California, Santa Cruz, whose biography of Dunbar Nelson examines her relationships with women. One poem from 1895, analysed by Professor Hull, addresses an unnamed woman. "I love you, and you know it well, Tevard. Your eyes have told me so. Fivden, and in your presence, I am calm civet as summer winds that blow." This poem, according to Professor Hull, uses the classic love lyric form to address a woman, declaring love openly while also suggesting reciprocation. "You know it well, Apidwi, your eyes have told me so." Dunbar, Nelson maintained intense romantic relationships with several women throughout her life, documented in her diary and letters, while also being married twice to men, living the complicated existence of a woman whose desires and affections included both women and men, but who had to navigate a world that increasingly categorized sexuality as either heterosexual or homosexual, with no recognition of more complex patterns of desire. Now, let me tell you about the letters between Christina Rossetti and Ellen Aline, because their correspondence in the 1860s reveals another example of passionate female friendship expressed in language that hovers between spiritual devotion and erotic love. According to research by Professor Diane D'Amico from Allegheny College, whose work on Christina Rossetti examines her relationships, Rossetti conducted several intense friendships with women throughout her life, and her letters to Ellen Aline are among the most passionate, expressing devotion in terms that draw on religious imagery and romantic aesthetics. In a letter from 1862, analysed by Professor D'Amico and preserved in the British Library, Rossetti wrote to Aline, "My beloved Ellen, I think of you constantly, pray for you fervently, and love you more than I can express in mere words. You are my dear friend, my sister in Christ, my heart's companion. When we are together, I feel closer to God, as if your presence sanctifies me and raises my thoughts to higher things. When we are apart, I feel bereft, as if part of my soul has gone with you and I am incomplete without you. Is this wrong? I do not think so, for surely God approves of love between women as much as any other pure affection, and yet I know that what I feel for you is more intense than conventional friendship, and I sometimes fear that I am guilty of loving the creature more than the Creator." This letter, according to Professor D'Amico, explicitly acknowledges that Rossetti's feelings for Aline exceed conventional friendship, while also framing those feelings in religious terms as pure affection, approved by God. The struggle between seeing her love as holy and fearing it as excessive reveals Rossetti's awareness that her feelings are potentially transgressive, even as she tries to validate them through religious framework. The description of feeling bereft and incomplete, when apart from Aline, suggests an emotional dependency that goes beyond ordinary friendship. Another letter from Rossetti to Elaine from 1863 and analysed by Professor D'Amico becomes even more emotionally intense. "Dearest, I dreamed of you last night, and in my dream you were an angel of light, beautiful beyond describing, and I fell at your feet in worship. When I woke, I wondered if my dream was sacrilegious, if I am wrong to think of you in such elevated terms, to see in you something approaching the divine, but I cannot help how I feel. You are the most beautiful person I have ever known, in soul and in countenance, and my love for you feels like worship, feels like prayer. Forgive me if this is wrong. I cannot change my heart." This letter, according to Professor D'Amico, uses explicitly religious language of worship and reverence to describe Rossetti's feelings for Aline, elevating her to near-divine status, while also expressing anxiety about whether such feelings are appropriate. The description of the dream where Rossetti falls at Aline's feet in worship suggests erotic elements disguised in or channeled through religious imagery. Professor D'Amico notes that Rossetti's poetry frequently uses religious eroticism, blurring the lines between divine love and human desire, and her letters to Aline demonstrate how she applied this same linguistic and conceptual blurring to her feelings for other women. Let me tell you about the phenomenon of particular friendships in Catholic convents, because religious institutions created another space where women could form intense relationships with each other. Relationships that were sometimes encouraged as promoting spiritual growth, and sometimes condemned as particular friendships that violated religious commitment to loving all sisters equally. According to research by Professor Judith Brown from Stanford University, whose work on Renaissance convents examines female relationships, Catholic religious authorities had long been concerned about intense romantic relationships between nuns, issuing periodic warnings against particular friendships, and sometimes punishing nuns who were perceived as too devoted to specific sisters. rather than to the community as a whole. Letters between nuns, when they survive, reveal both the intensity of these relationships and the women's awareness that they were potentially problematic from the institutional perspective. A letter from 1841 from a French nun to another nun in her convent, analysed by Professor Brown and preserved in convent archives, expresses love while also showing anxiety about its acceptability. My dearest sister in Christ, I write to tell you that you are always in my prayers, but more than that, you are always in my thoughts, in my heart, in my very being. I know that Mother Superior would disapprove if she knew how much I think of you, how I seek opportunities to be near you, how my day feels empty when I do not see you. I know that I should love all my sisters equally, but I cannot help loving you more, loving you differently, loving you with a love that feels like what the poets describe. Is this wrong? I confess I do not know, and I confess I do not care. I will love you as I love you, and pray that God forgives me if this is sin. This letter, according to Professor Brown, shows the writer struggling between institutional requirements to avoid particular friendships and her inability to control her feelings for the specific woman she loves. The reference to what the poets describe suggests she recognizes her feelings as romantic love, even though she cannot openly name them as such in the convent context. Her decision to continue loving, despite uncertainty about whether it is sinful, shows her prioritizing the relationship over institutional approval, a risky choice in a convent setting where obedience to superiors was expected. Another letter from a British nun from 1858, analysed by Professor Brown and preserved in diocesan archives, shows similar tensions. My beloved, we must be more careful. I fear that Sister Catherine has noticed how we look at each other, how we find excuses to work together, how we linger after evening prayers to whisper in the chapel. She has not said anything yet, but I see suspicion in her eyes. We cannot give them reason to separate us or to punish us for particular friendship. I could not bear to be sent to another house, to be apart from you for months or years. Let us be more discreet in public, even as we keep our love alive in private. Our love is sacred to me, but it must be secret too. This letter, according to Professor Brown, reveals awareness that the relationship is being observed and is potentially at risk of institutional intervention. The reference to not being able to bear to be apart emphasizes how central the relationship is to the writer's life in the convent. The decision to be more discreet while keeping the love alive in private shows the women developing strategies to protect their relationship while navigating institutional constraints. Let me tell you about letters written in the early decades of the 1800s, because the beginning of the century saw a flowering of romantic friendship culture that would shape women's relationships for generations to come. According to research by Professor Marilyn Ferris-Motts from Bowling Green State University, whose work on early 19th century women examines their social networks, the years between 1800 and 1820 were characterized by an explosion of female literacy and letter writing as more women gained access to education and as postal systems became more reliable and affordable. Women used these newfound capabilities to create and maintain intimate friendships across distances, writing letters that documented their emotional lives with unprecedented detail and intensity. A letter from 1803 from Eliza Southgate to her friend Moses Porter, analysed by Professor Motts and preserved at the Maine Historical Society, shows a young woman navigating the transition between her passionate friendship with another woman and the social expectation of marriage. Eliza wrote, "You ask me if I have entirely forgotten my dear Octavia since becoming engaged to you. How can you ask such a thing? My love for Octavia is as strong as ever it was, perhaps stronger now that I know our daily intimacy must soon end. When I marry you, I will gain a husband, but I will lose the companion of my heart, the friend who knows my soul better than I know it myself. This is the sacrifice that marriage requires of women, and I confess I make it with a heavy heart, even as I look forward to our union. Can you understand that I can love you both, but in different ways, and that losing her constant companionship is the greatest cost of becoming your wife. This letter, according to Professor Motz, reveals the tension that many women felt between romantic friendships and heterosexual marriage, understanding that marriage would require them to subordinate their female friendships to their relationships with their husbands. Eliza's frank acknowledgement that marrying Moses means losing Octavia, and that this is a sacrifice, shows her clear-eyed awareness of what marriage would cost her emotionally. The question, "Can you understand that I can love you both?" suggests Eliza hoped for a marriage that would accommodate her continued friendship with Octavia, though whether she achieved this is unknown from the surviving correspondence. Another letter from the early 1800s, from 1808, and written by Deborah Norris Logan to her friend Sally Wister, analysed by Professor Motz and preserved at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, expresses longing for a friend who had married and moved away. "My dearest Sally, it has been 6 months since you left Philadelphia to make your home with Mr. Brown in New York, and I confess I am no more reconciled to your absence now than I was on the day you departed. I miss you every moment of every day. I miss our long walks together, our evening conversations, the way we could speak to each other without words, just a glance conveying everything. Your letters are my only comfort, but they are poor substitutes for your actual presence. I read them over and over until the pages are worn soft from handling. Sometimes I sleep with your latest letter under my pillow, imagining it brings me closer to you somehow. Tell me honestly, are you happy? Does your husband treat you well? Do you ever think of me with the same longing I feel for you?" This letter, according to Professor Motz, shows the profound sense of loss that women experienced when their intimate friends married and moved away, effectively ending the daily intimacy they had shared. Deborah's confession that she sleeps with Sally's letters under her pillow reveals the depth of her longing, and her questions about Sally's happiness, and whether Sally thinks of her suggest anxiety that Sally might forget their friendship in the excitement of married life. The phrase, "the way we could speak to each other without words," describes an intimacy that Deborah clearly fears she will never replicate with anyone else. Now let me tell you about German women's letters in the 1800s. Because romantic friendships were not only an Anglo-American phenomenon, but flourished across Europe in ways that reflected different cultural contexts and literary traditions. According to research by Professor Catherine Goodman from Brown University, whose work on German women's writing examines epistolary culture, German romantic friendship in the early 19th century was deeply influenced by the literary movement of Romanticism, which celebrated intense emotion, individual feeling, and the possibility of transcendent connection between kindred souls. German women's letters to each other often employed the heightened language of romantic literature, describing their friendships in terms borrowed from poetry and philosophy. A letter from 1815 from Bettina Brentano to Caroline von Genderode, analysed by Professor Goodman and preserved in German archives, demonstrates this romantic aesthetic. "Mein Geliebtes, my beloved. When I am with you, I feel as though I have found the other half of my soul that has been missing since birth. We are not two separate beings, but one spirit inhabiting two bodies. And when we are apart, I feel incomplete, diminished, less than whole. Last night I dreamed we were two stars in the heavens, eternally bound together, circling each other in an endless dance. When I woke, I wept because the dream was more real to me than my waking life without you. I love you with a love that transcends the merely human, a love that partakes of the divine, a love that will endure beyond death into whatever eternity awaits us." This letter, according to Professor Goodman, uses the language of romantic philosophy about divided souls finding their completion in each other, framing the friendship in terms that elevate it beyond ordinary human relationships to something approaching spiritual or divine connection. The dream imagery of two stars eternally circling each other creates a cosmic metaphor for their relationship, suggesting it operates on a scale beyond individual human lives. The assertion that this love transcends the merely human and will endure beyond death claims for the friendship a significance and permanence usually reserved for religious devotion or transcendent love. Tragically, according to Professor Goodman, Caroline von Genderode died by suicide in 1806, devastated by a failed love affair with a man, and Bettina spent decades preserving Caroline's memory through writing a fictionalized account of their friendship that was published in 1840. In the introduction to this book, analysed by Professor Goodman, Bettina wrote about Caroline, "She was the great love of my youth, the friend who understood me completely, the soul who spoke to my soul in a language no one else could comprehend. When she died, she took part of me with her, and I have spent my life trying to resurrect her through my words, to keep her alive in memory since she could not remain alive in body. Our friendship was the most real and true thing I have ever experienced, more real than any of the so-called real relationships society tells us we should value. I will love her until I die, and beyond." This retrospective account, according to Professor Goodman, shows Bettina at middle age looking back on her youthful friendship with Caroline and asserting its primacy over all her other relationships, including her marriage. The phrase, "more real than any of the so-called real relationships society tells us we should value," explicitly challenges the hierarchy that placed marriage above friendship, asserting that her romantic friendship with Caroline was more meaningful and significant than socially sanctioned relationships. Bettina's dedication to preserving Caroline's memory for decades after her death demonstrates the lasting impact of their friendship on her life and identity. Let me tell you about Italian women's letters in the 1800s, because Italy's particular political and cultural context shaped romantic friendships in distinctive ways. According to research by Professor Gabriella Romani from Seton Hall University, whose work on Italian women writers examines their correspondence networks, 19th century Italy was a nation in the process of unification, with women playing significant roles in political and cultural movements, while often being excluded from formal political power. Women's letters to each other during this period often combined expressions of personal affection with discussions of political ideals and shared commitment to Italian national identity, creating romantic friendships that were simultaneously personal and political. A letter from 1848 from Cristina Trivulzio di Belgiojoso to her friend Bianca Melissi, analysed by Professor Romani and preserved in Milan archives, shows this combination of personal devotion and political partnership. "My dearest Bianca, as I write to you from my exile in Paris, I think constantly of our years together in Milan, working side by side for the cause of Italian independence, sharing not only our political convictions but our deepest hopes and fears. You were more than a comrade in the struggle, you were my intimate companion, the friend who knew all my secrets, the woman I loved above all others. I miss you desperately, and I confess that my exile is made more painful by your absence than by distance from my homeland. When Italy is free, when we can return to Milano together, I promise you we will never be separated again. Until then, know that you are in my thoughts every moment, and that my love for you sustains me through these dark times." This letter, according to Professor Romani, demonstrates how Italian women's romantic friendships were intertwined with their political activism, with shared commitment to national unification, creating bonds that were both ideological and deeply personal. Christina's statement that Bianca was the woman I loved above all others is remarkably direct, and her promise that we will never be separated again frames their reunion as the ultimate goal, even more important than Italian unification itself. The letter reveals how political exile intensified emotional longing, making the distance from Bianca even more painful than distance from homeland. Another letter from 1860 from Bianca Melissi to Cristina, analysed by Professor Romani, expresses similar sentiments. "My treasured Cristina, your letter arrived today, and I have read it so many times that I can recite it from memory. Knowing that you miss me as I miss you brings me both joy and sorrow, joy that our love is mutual and constant, sorrow that we must endure this separation. I count the days until Italy is unified and we can be together again. I dream of the home we will make together, the life we will build, the work we will continue side by side. You are my partner in all things, my dearest friend, my beloved companion, and I am yours forever. no matter how many miles separate us, no matter how many years we must wait. This letter, according to Professor Romani, uses the language of committed partnership, describing a shared future where the two women will make a home together and build a life, terminology that echoes marital commitment. The phrase, "my partner in all things," claims a relationship that encompasses political work, domestic life, and emotional intimacy, a partnership as comprehensive as any marriage. These letters between Christina and Bianca, according to Professor Romani, continued for decades and document a friendship that sustained both women through political upheaval, exile, and personal losses, remaining central to their identities throughout their lives. Now let me tell you about working-class women's letters in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, because the archive of female romantic friendship becomes more class, diverse as the 19th century progresses and literacy spreads to working and lower middle class women. According to research by Professor Anna Clark from the University of Minnesota, whose work on working class women examines their personal writings by mid-century factory workers, domestic servants, and shop girls were increasingly literate and used letter writing to maintain friendships when economic necessity forced them to migrate for work, or when they were separated by service in different households. A letter from 1851 from Mary Ann Taylor, a domestic servant, to her friend Elizabeth Hughes, who had migrated to Australia, analysed by Professor Clark and preserved at the National Archives in Kew, reveals both the emotional intensity and the economic constraints of working-class romantic friendships. My dearest Lizzie, I write to you though I know this letter will take months to reach you, and I may never receive a reply, for the postage is so dear and my wages so small that I can afford to write only rarely. But I must tell you that I think of you constantly, and that my heart aches from missing you. When you left for Australia, it felt as though part of my soul was torn away. We had been together since we were girls in service together at the manor house, sleeping in the same attic room, sharing our dreams and fears, holding each other when the work was too hard and the loneliness too great. You were my family, my sister, my dearest friend, my everything. Now I am alone, and the other girls in service here are kind, but they are not you, can never be you. I pray that you are well and happy in your new life, and that sometimes you think of me and remember the love we shared. This letter, according to Professor Clark, reveals the particular poignancy of working-class romantic friendships, where economic necessity often forced permanent separations that wealthier women could avoid. Mary Ann's acknowledgement that she can afford to write only rarely because of postage costs highlights how poverty constrained even letter writing, making it difficult to maintain long-distance friendships. The description of sharing an attic room and holding each other when the work was too hard suggests both emotional and physical intimacy born of shared hardship, with the friendship providing comfort and support in brutal working conditions. The phrase, "you were my family," indicates that for working-class women who were often separated from biological families by their work, romantic friendships could become the primary kinship bonds in their lives. Another working-class letter from 1867, from Jane Morris, a factory worker in Manchester, to her friend Sarah Thompson, who had married and moved to London, analysed by Professor Clark and preserved in Labour History Archives, expresses jealousy and a sense of abandonment. Sarah, I received your letter telling me of your marriage and your new life in London, and I confess I do not know whether to be happy for you or heartbroken for myself. You say you are content, that your husband is kind, that your life is comfortable, and I should be glad of this. But all I can think is that you have left me behind, that you have chosen a man over our friendship, that the intimacy we shared for 5 years in the mill means less to you than respectability and security. Is that unfair of me? Perhaps. But I cannot help how I feel. You were my greatest friend, the person I loved most in the world, and now you are gone, living a life I can never share, and I am alone in this cold city with no one who understands me as you did. I wish you well, Sarah, truly I do, but I also wish you had not forgotten me so easily. This letter, according to Professor Clark, expresses the complex emotions of abandonment, jealousy, and grief that could characterize working-class women's response to a friend's marriage, particularly when marriage represented upward mobility that left the unmarried friend behind in harsh working conditions. Jane's accusation that Sarah has chosen a man over our friendship and forgotten me so easily reveals her perception that marriage has ended their romantic friendship, not just geographically, but emotionally. The tone of the letter, hurt and accusatory, while also wishing Sarah well, captures the conflicted feelings of someone who has lost her primary relationship to what she sees as social convention and economic advantage. Let me tell you about letters written during the American Civil War, because major historical events often intensified female friendships as women supported each other through crisis and loss. According to research by Professor Drew Gilpin-Faust from Harvard University, whose work on Civil War women examines their experiences, women on both sides of the conflict relied on female friendships for emotional support as they dealt with absent husbands and brothers, economic hardship, and the constant threat of loss. Letters between women during this period often express love and devotion, intensified by wartime anxiety and the heightened emotions of living through historic upheaval. A letter from 1862 from Sarah Butler to her friend Helen Pierce, both living in Massachusetts, analysed by Professor Faust and preserved at the Massachusetts Historical Society, shows how the war intensified an existing friendship. My dearest Helen, I write to you in the midst of such anxiety and fear that I can barely hold my pen steady. My brother has gone to war, Helen's husband has enlisted, and we are left here together to wait and worry and wonder if they will return. Thank God I have you to share this burden. You are my anchor in this storm, my comfort in the darkness, the one person who truly understands what I am feeling because you feel it too. Last night when we sat together in the parlour, neither of us able to sleep, and you took my hand and held it, I felt such love for you, such gratitude that I am not alone in this terrible time. I do not know what I would do without you. You are my strength, my hope, my dearest companion. This letter, according to Professor Faust, shows how shared experience of wartime anxiety created intense emotional bonds between women, with the friendship providing essential support that enabled them to cope with fear and uncertainty. The description of sitting together through a sleepless night, holding hands for comfort, suggests physical as well as emotional intimacy. Sarah's statement that she does not know what she would do without Helen indicates her dependence on the friendship for psychological survival during crisis. According to Professor Faust, many wartime friendships between women intensified to the point where the women became more central to each other's lives than the absent men they were ostensibly waiting for. Another Civil War letter from 1864 from Mary Chesnut to her friend Louisa Wigfall, both Confederate women in Richmond, analysed by Professor Faust and published in Mary Chesnut's famous diary, reveals similar intensity. Dearest Louisa, in these dark days when our world is collapsing around us, when everything we knew is being destroyed, you are my only constant, my only certainty. I love you with a desperation born of knowing that everything is temporary, that anyone can be taken from us at any moment, that we must hold tight to what we have while we have it. When we are together, the war fades away and there is only us. Only this love. I want to memorize everything about you. Your voice, your laugh, the way you tilt your head when you are thinking, so that if we are separated, I will have these memories to sustain me. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will remember that I loved you, that our friendship was real and true, and the most important thing in my life. This letter, according to Professor Faust, expresses the heightened awareness of mortality and impermanence that characterized wartime emotional life, with Mary explicitly acknowledging that Anione can be taken from us at any moment, and therefore expressing her love with unusual urgency and directness. The desire to memorize everything about Louisa suggests Mary is preparing for the possibility of loss trying to preserve the relationship in memory against the possibility that they might be separated or that one of them might die. The phrase, "I loved you," uses past tense, even though both women are alive, as if Mary is already writing from a future in which the relationship has ended, making this both a love letter and a preemptive elegy. Now let me tell you about Scandinavian women's letters in the 1800s, because Nordic countries had their own traditions of female friendship that reflected their particular cultural values and social structures. According to research by Professor Ida Blom from the University of Bergen, whose work on Norwegian women examines their social networks, Scandinavian women in the 19th century had relatively high literacy rates and often formed intense friendships that combined emotional intimacy with shared domestic and economic activities. Women's letters in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark reveal friendships that were practical partnerships as well as romantic attachments, with women supporting each other economically and domestically in ways that created interdependence beyond emotional connection alone. A letter from 1871 from Inga Andersson to her friend Karin Lindström, both unmarried women living in rural Sweden, analysed by Professor Blom and preserved in Swedish regional archives, describes a partnership that combined economic cooperation with romantic attachment. "My beloved Karin, I write to propose that we formalise our arrangement and make our household together permanent. We have lived together now for 3 years, sharing our work and our resources, and I cannot imagine living any other way. You manage the dairy and I the chickens, and together we produce enough to support ourselves without needing to depend on any man. But more than the practical benefits, I treasure your companionship, your love, the life we have built together. You are my partner in all ways, and I want us to make a formal commitment to each other, to promise that we will continue together for the rest of our lives. What say you? Will you pledge yourself to me as I pledge myself to you?" This letter, according to Professor Blom, proposes what amounts to a marriage between the two women, combining economic partnership with emotional commitment and seeking formal acknowledgement of their relationship through mutual pledge. The practical details about managing the dairy and chickens are intertwined with declarations of love and companionship, revealing how Scandinavian women's romantic friendships often had economic dimensions that made them sustainable partnerships independent of men. Inga's desire for formal commitment and mutual pledges suggests she understood their relationship as equivalent to marriage in permanence and significance, even if it could not be legally recognized as such. Another Scandinavian letter from 1883, from Astrid Petersen to her friend Mette Hansen, both Danish women who had worked together as teachers, analysed by Professor Blom and preserved at the Royal Library in Copenhagen, expresses grief at the ending of their partnership when Mette decided to marry. Mette, I received your letter announcing your engagement, and I confess I have been unable to stop crying since I read it. I know I should be happy for you, should wish you joy in your new life, but all I feel is grief and abandonment. We have been together for 8 years, sharing our home, our work, our lives. We built something together, created a partnership that was whole and complete and satisfying, and now you are throwing it away for marriage to a man you barely know, a man who will control your money, your work, your very body. How can you choose that over what we had? How can you leave me for a life of legal subordination when we were equals in our partnership? I love you, Mette, and I thought you loved me, but apparently I was wrong about the depth of your commitment to me and to the life we built together. This letter, according to Professor Blom, expresses not only grief at losing a beloved companion, but also political objection to marriage as an institution that would subordinate Mette to male control. Astrid's emphasis on their equality as partners versus the legal subordination of marriage reveals her understanding of their romantic friendship as superior to heterosexual marriage in its egalitarian structure. Her accusation that Mette is throwing away 8 years of partnership suggests she sees Mette's choice as a betrayal, not only of their personal relationship, but of the alternative to marriage that their partnership represented. According to Professor Blom, such letters reveal that some women understood their romantic friendships as deliberate alternatives to marriage, as ways of living that preserved their autonomy and equality. and felt genuine political and personal betrayal when friends chose marriage over continued partnership. Let me tell you about letters written between women who met in reform movements and political organizations, because shared activism created opportunities for passionate friendships to develop between women with common values and goals. According to research by Professor Nancy Cott from Harvard University, whose work on women's reform movements examines their organizational culture, temperance societies, abolition organizations, and women's rights groups brought together women who shared intellectual interests and political commitments, creating contexts for friendships that combined ideological partnership with romantic attachment. Letters between women activists often expressed love in terms that connected personal devotion to shared political vision, creating relationships where the political was deeply personal. A letter from 1872 from Susan B. Anthony to her friend and colleague Anna Dickinson, analysed by Professor Cott and preserved at the Library of Congress, expresses both political partnership and romantic longing. Dearest Anna, your speech last night was magnificent, powerful. Everything I knew it would be and more. Watching you on that stage, commanding the attention of thousands, speaking truth to power with such courage and eloquence, I felt such pride and such love for you that my heart seemed too full to contain it. You are a warrior for justice, a voice for the voiceless, and the finest woman I have ever known. But more than that, you are my beloved friend, the companion I think of constantly when we are apart, the person whose good opinion means more to me than anyone else's. I want to be with you always, working side by side for the cause, sharing our lives completely. Tell me you feel the same. Tell me I am as essential to you as you are to me. This letter, according to Professor Cott, combines political admiration with romantic declaration, treating Anna's political accomplishments and her personal qualities as equally worthy of love. Susan's desire to be with you always and sharing our lives completely expresses commitment to a partnership that would encompass both their political work and their personal relationship. The plea, "Tell me you feel the same," reveals vulnerability and uncertainty, suggesting Susan is not entirely confident that Anna reciprocates the depth of her feelings, or perhaps that she is testing whether Anna is willing to acknowledge the romantic dimension of their friendship openly. Another letter from 1875 from Frances Willard to her friend Anna Gordon, analysed by Professor Cott and preserved at the Frances Willard House Archives, describes a commitment ceremony the two women conducted privately. "My precious Anna, last night we made our vows to each other, promising to be faithful companions for life, to support each other through all trials, to love each other with constancy and devotion until death parts us. Though no minister blessed our union and no law recognizes our commitment, I consider myself bound to you as truly as any marriage vows could bind me. You are my partner, my life's companion, my heart's choice. We have created our own ceremony and made our own promises, and these are sacred to me, even if the world does not acknowledge them. I am yours, and you are mine, now and always." This letter, according to Professor Cott, describes what amounts to a private marriage ceremony between the two women, complete with mutual vows and lifetime commitment. Frances's acknowledgement that no minister blessed our union and no law recognizes our commitment shows her awareness that their relationship exists outside legal and religious frameworks. But her assertion that she considers herself bound to Anna as truly as any marriage vows claims equivalent status for their partnership. The creation of their own ceremony demonstrates women's agency in defining their relationships on their own terms when society provided no formal recognition for their loves. Now, let me tell you about letters between women in artistic and literary circles in the late 19th century, because aesthetic movements like aestheticism and decadence created cultural spaces where unconventional relationships could be lived more openly. According to research by Professor Talia Schaffer from Queen's College, CUNY, whose work on Victorian aestheticism examines gender and sexuality. Women artists and writers in the 1880s and 1890s often conducted romantic relationships with other women within communities that were more tolerant of sexual and gender nonconformity than mainstream Victorian society. Letters between these women often expressed desire more explicitly than earlier in the century, reflecting both changing cultural attitudes and the confidence that came from being part of communities where their relationships were accepted, or even celebrated. A letter from 1893 from Michael Field, the pen name used by Catherine Bradley and Edith Cooper, who were aunt and niece but lived as life partners to their friend Violet Paget, who wrote under the name Vernon Lee, analysed by Professor Schaffer and preserved in the Michael Field archive, describes their relationship with unusual openness. Dearest Vernon, you asked us to explain how we live and work together, and we will try to answer. Honestly, we are lovers, companions, collaborators, everything to each other. Our work is not Catherine's or Edith's, but Michael Field's, the creation of our joint mind and our united souls. In life as in art, we are one being. We share everything: our bed, our thoughts, our creative impulses, our love. We cannot imagine being separate people, cannot conceive of one of us existing without the other. This may shock conventional morality, but we do not live by conventional rules. We have created our own way of being in the world, our own form of love and life and art, and we will not apologize for it or hide it from those who have eyes to see and understand. This letter, according to Professor Schaffer, is remarkably direct in describing both the romantic and sexual nature of Catherine and Edith's relationship. We are lovers, we share our bed, and their rejection of conventional morality in favour of creating their own way of being in the world. The assertion that they are one being both in life and in literary creation claims a unity and completeness that needs no external validation. According to Professor Schaffer, Michael Field's openness about their relationship was possible partly because they were part of aesthetic circles where artistic genius was understood to transcend conventional moral rules, and partly because they had enough financial independence and social confidence to risk some degree of social disapproval. Another letter from the aesthetic circles, from 1896, from artist Romaine Brooks to her lover Winnaretta Singer, latter Princesse de Polignac, analysed by Professor Schaffer and preserved in private archives, expresses desire in explicitly erotic terms. My darling Winnie, I cannot stop thinking about our afternoon together, the feel of your skin against mine, the taste of your lips, the sounds you made when we made love. I want you constantly, my body aches for you when we are apart. I dream of you every night and wake wanting you. I have never felt desire like this before, have never wanted anyone the way I want you. You have awakened something in me that I did not know existed, a capacity for passion and physical longing that consumes me. When can I see you again? When can we be alone together? I need you. I need your touch. I need to feel you against me and inside me and all around me. I love you madly, desperately, completely. This letter, according to Professor Schaffer, is sexually explicit in a way that would have been almost unthinkable earlier in the century, describing not only emotional love but physical desire and actual sexual activity with direct language. The progression from earlier 19th century letters that hinted at physical intimacy through coded language to late century letters like this one that describe it explicitly reflects both changing cultural attitudes towards sexuality and women's increasing willingness to claim sexual agency and desire. According to Professor Schaffer, women in artistic circles in the 1890s often felt freer to express same-sex desire openly because they understood themselves as living outside conventional morality by virtue of their artistic identities. Let me tell you about the explosion of college romantic friendships in American women's colleges in the late 19th century, expanding on what you learned earlier about smashing. According to research by Professor Sherry Innes from Miami University, whose work on college culture examines same-sex relationships, by the 1880s and 1890s, women's colleges had developed elaborate rituals and customs around romantic friendships that were specific to each institution, but shared common features across schools. At Vassar, Smith, Wellesley, and other colleges, romantic relationships between students were so common and socially accepted that they had their own vocabulary, rituals, and even public ceremonies. A letter from 1885 from a Wellesley student, her mother, analysed by Professor Innes and preserved in Wellesley College archives, describes the culture of smashing with remarkable frankness. "Dearest mother, you asked in your last letter about my social life here at college, and I will tell you about the custom of smashing that dominates much of student society. Nearly every girl has a smash on another girl, either a classmate or, more often, a girl in an upper class. The pursuit of one's smash involves leaving gifts at her door, sending her flowers and candy, writing her love notes, and trying to gain her attention and favour. If she reciprocates, the two girls become a recognised couple, walking together everywhere, sitting together at meals, attending events as a pair. Some of these relationships are quite physical, with the girls kissing and embracing openly, in ways that would be scandalous between men and women, but that here are considered innocent expressions of female affection. I myself have a smash on a senior named Margaret, who is beautiful and brilliant and kind. I am desperately trying to win her attention, though I have many rivals. Please send more ribbon and chocolates in your next package, so I have offerings for her." This letter, according to Professor Innes, reveals how normalised romantic relationships between women students had become by the 1880s, with the student comfortable describing the entire culture to her mother and even requesting supplies for courting her beloved. The description of these relationships being quite physical, but considered innocent, shows the ambiguous status of female same-sex affection, simultaneously recognised as romantic courtship and dismissed as harmless friendship. The competitive aspect, with the writer having many rivals for Margaret's attention, demonstrates that these relationships were taken seriously by participants, even if administrators treated them as childish infatuations. Another college letter from 1890 from a Smith College student's diary, rather than a letter but analysed by Professor Innes and preserved in Smith College archives, describes a breakup with emotional intensity equal to any romantic breakup. The 15th of November 1890. "My heart is broken. Jane has ended our relationship and has taken up with another girl, a sophomore, who is prettier and more vivacious than I am. I cannot eat, cannot sleep, cannot concentrate on my studies. Every time I see them together, walking arm in arm, whispering and laughing, I feel such jealousy and pain that I can barely breathe. We were together for over a year," she said. "She loved me, said we would always be friends even after we graduated, and now she has cast me aside for someone new, as if our love meant nothing. My friends try to comfort me, but nothing helps. I loved her with my whole heart, and she has destroyed me. I do not know how I will survive this." This diary entry, according to Professor Innes, documents the genuine emotional devastation of a college breakup, with the writer experiencing the same symptoms of heartbreak, inability to eat or sleep, obsessive jealousy, feelings of worthlessness that characterize any romantic rejection. The intensity of emotion described here contradicts the idea that college smashes were superficial or playful. Clearly, for many participants, these were serious romantic relationships with real emotional stakes. The fact that the writer has friends who try to comfort me suggests that heartbreak from smashes was common enough that there were social support systems in place to help students through breakups. Let me tell you about letters that women wrote in old age looking back on their romantic friendships, because retrospective accounts reveal how women understood these relationships across the span of their entire lives. According to research by Professor Carol Smith Rosenberg from the University of Michigan, whose groundbreaking essay, The Female World of Love and Ritual, examines women's friendships across the life cycle, women often maintained romantic friendships from youth through old age, with the relationships evolving but remaining emotionally central even after decades. Letters written by elderly women about friendships from their youth reveal both continued love and sometimes reinterpretation of what those relationships meant in light of changing cultural understandings of same-sex love. A letter from 1895 from an elderly woman identified only as EB to her surviving friend, Am, both in their 70s, analysed by Professor Smith, Rosenberg, and preserved in private family papers, reflects on 50 years of friendship, my dearest A. As we approach the end of our lives, I find myself thinking often about the beginning, about the girls we were when we met in 1845, young and full of dreams and passionate in our love for each other. We have lived through so much together, marriages, children, deaths, joys and sorrows, and through it all you have been my constant companion, my truest friend, my most beloved. My husband has been dead these 10 years, your husband 15. Our children are grown and scattered, but we two remain, still together, still loving each other as we always have. I look at you now, your hair white as mine, your face lined with the years we have lived, and I see both the girl you were and the woman you have become, and I love both equally. We have shared a lifetime, and I am grateful for every moment of it. When my time comes, as it must soon, I will die content knowing that I loved and was loved, that I had in you a companion whose love sustained me through everything life brought. That is more than most people can say, and I consider myself blessed beyond measure. This letter, according to Professor Smith Rosenberg, reveals a romantic friendship that lasted over 50 years, surviving marriages, widowhood, and the challenges of aging, remaining central to both women's lives until death. BB's ability to see both the girl you were and the woman you have become suggests a depth of knowing that comes from decades of shared life. Her statement that she will die content having loved and been loved by Am places their friendship at the centre of her life's meaning, more significant than her marriage or even her children in giving her life purpose and joy. According to Professor Smith Rosenberg, such letters reveal that for many women, romantic friendships were not youthful phases to be outgrown, but lifelong relationships that provided primary emotional intimacy across the entire lifespan. Another retrospective letter from 1902 from writer Sarah Orne Jewett at age 53 to her younger partner, Annie Adams Fields, widow of publisher James Teams. Fields and Jewett's companion for nearly 30 years, analysed by Professor Smith, Rosenberg, and preserved at the Massachusetts Historical Society, reflects on the changing cultural understanding of their relationship. My dearest Annie, you said yesterday that you worried people might misunderstand the nature of our relationship. Now that there are these new ideas about women who love women, these medical theories that categorize such love as deviant or unnatural, I told you then, and I tell you now in writing, I do not care what people think or what doctors say. What we have is beautiful and true, and has sustained us both for 3 decades. We have made a life together, a home together, a partnership that has brought us both happiness and fulfillment. If the world wants to call that unnatural, let them. We know the truth. Our love is as natural as breathing, as necessary as air, and I will not apologize for it, or hide it, or redefine it to make others comfortable. I am yours, and you are mine. And that is all that matters. This letter, according to Professor Smith Rosenberg, shows Jewett consciously resisting the late 19th and early 20th century medical pathologization of same-sex love, asserting that external categorization cannot change the intrinsic value and naturalness of her relationship with Annie. Her defiant stance, I do not care what people think or what doctors say, reveals awareness that the cultural climate around female romantic friendships was changing, becoming more hostile and suspicious, but also demonstrates determination to continue living and loving, as she always had regardless of changing attitudes. According to Professor Smith Rosenberg, this kind of resistance to medical and social pathologization was more common than historical accounts sometimes suggest, with many women simply refusing to accept external definitions of their relationships that contradicted their own lived experience. Now, let me tell you about letters between women who lived in frontier and colonial settings, because geographic isolation and frontier conditions created unique contexts for female romantic friendships. according to research by Professor Ann M. Butler from Utah State University, whose work on Western women examines their relationships. Women living in remote areas often relied heavily on each other for emotional and practical support in the absence of the larger female communities available in eastern cities. Letters between women on the frontier reveal both the isolation they experienced and the intensity of the friendships that developed when they did find female companionship in remote areas. A letter from 1877 from Miriam Davis to her friend Rebecca Wilson, both living on homesteads in Montana Territory, analysed by Professor Butler and preserved in Montana Historical Society archives, expresses the desperate loneliness of frontier life and the salvation of finding a female friend. Dearest Rebecca, before you arrived in the territory last spring, I was drowning in loneliness. My husband is a good man, but he is taciturn and practical, not given to conversation or emotional expression. I spent months seeing no one but him and the children, starving for adult female companionship, for someone to talk to about things beyond crops and weather and the endless work of survival. When your family took up the land 10 miles from ours, when I first met you and we talked for hours as if we had known each other all our lives, I felt like a person dying of thirst who had finally found water. You saved me, Rebecca. Your friendship, your understanding, your presence in my life has made it bearable, even joyful. The 10 miles between our homesteads feel like 1,000, and I long constantly for the days when we can visit. I think of you every moment. I love you more than I have words to express. This letter, according to Professor Butler, reveals the particular intensity that geographic isolation could bring to female friendships, with Miriam explicitly stating that Rebecca saved her from unbearable loneliness. The comparison of finding Rebecca to finding water when dying of thirst emphasizes the essential nature of the friendship for Miriam's survival and well-being. The statement that her husband, though a good man, could not provide the emotional connection she needed highlights the limits of heterosexual marriage in meeting women's needs for intimacy and understanding, needs that could only be met by another woman. According to Professor Butler, frontier women's letters often express similar sentiments, valuing female friendships as essential lifelines in isolated circumstances. Another frontier letter from 1883 from Oregon Trail Diaries, preserved by Professor Butler, describes a romantic friendship that developed during westward migration. We buried Mrs. Henderson today, dead of cholera like so many before her. Her daughter Mary is inconsolable, and I confess I am not far behind her in grief. Mrs. Henderson and I had become the closest of friends during these months on the trail, sharing a wagon when mine broke down, caring for each other's children, sitting up through long nights talking about everything and nothing. She was my anchor in this terrible journey, the friend who understood my fears and hopes, the companion who made the unbearable bearable. And now she is gone, buried in an unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere, and I must continue west without her. I told Mary I would look after her as if she were my own daughter, to honour the woman I loved. I will carry Mrs. Henderson's memory with me to Oregon, and I will never forget the gift of her friendship, brief as it was. This diary entry, according to Professor Butler, documents how crisis situations like the Oregon Trail migration created intense female bonds born of shared hardship and mutual dependence. The writer's grief for Mrs. Henderson is profound, and her promise to care for Mary, as if she were my own daughter, represents a kind of chosen kinship based on love for the mother. The phrase "the woman I loved" is direct and unambiguous, claiming love openly even in death. According to Professor Butler, trail diaries and letters are filled with such accounts of intense female friendships that developed during migration, many of which ended tragically in death from disease, accident, or childbirth, leaving surviving women to grieve lost companions who had become central to their emotional lives in a matter of months. Let me tell you about letters between women in missionary and colonial contexts, because cross-cultural encounters created unique opportunities and challenges for romantic friendships. According to research by Professor Barbara Welter from Hunter College, whose work on American women in mission examines their relationships. Women missionaries often formed intense partnerships with each other in foreign settings, where they were isolated from American society and relied on each other for emotional support, professional collaboration, and companionship. Letters between missionary women reveal friendships that combined shared religious commitment with romantic attachment, and sometimes complicated dynamics when white women developed romantic friendships with women from the cultures where they were doing missionary work. A letter from 1887 from Harriet Newell to her missionary partner Sophia Parker, both working in India, analysed by Professor Welter and preserved in Missionary Society archives, describes their partnership in both spiritual and romantic terms. My beloved Sophia, 5 years we have laboured together in this field, sharing everything, our work, our home, our prayers, our very lives. I cannot imagine doing this work without you by my side. You are not only my colleague, but my dearest companion, the person I love most in the world. Each night when we pray together before retiring to our shared bed, I thank God for bringing you into my life. Some might question the propriety of two unmarried women sharing a bed, but we know our love is pure and holy, dedicated to God's work and to each other. I love you with a love that I believe is blessed by God, and I will continue to love you as long as we both shall live. We are partners in every sense, in mission, in life, in heart and soul. This letter, according to Professor Welter, uses religious language to sanctify the romantic friendship, framing it as pure and holy, and blessed by God to counter potential criticism of their living arrangements and intimate relationship. The phrase partners in every sense claims comprehensiveness for their partnership similar to marriage, encompassing professional work, domestic life, and emotional intimacy. According to Professor Welter, missionary partnerships often included bed sharing and domestic arrangements that looked very much like marriages, with the religious framework providing legitimacy and protection for relationships that might otherwise have been questioned. Now let me tell you about the late 19th century emergence of the New Woman and how this cultural figure impacted romantic friendships between women. According to research by Professor Martha Vicinis from the University of Michigan, whose work on intimate friendships examines the New Woman phenomenon, the 1880s and 1890s saw the emergence of a new type of woman, educated, professionally ambitious, economically independent, and often uninterested in conventional marriage. These new women often formed romantic friendships and partnerships with each other that were consciously understood as alternatives to heterosexual marriage, as ways of living that preserved their autonomy and allowed them to pursue their ambitions. A letter from 1891 from Dr. Mary Putnam Jacobi to her colleague Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, analysed by Professor Vicinis and preserved in medical history archives, discusses the choice between marriage and partnership with another woman. Dear Dr. Blackwell, you asked me why I chose to make my life with Dr. Garrett rather than accept any of the several marriage proposals I have received over the years. The answer is simple. I wanted to maintain my medical career, my independence, my intellectual freedom. Marriage would have required me to subordinate my ambitions to a husband's, to bear children and manage a household, to give up the work that gives my life meaning. My partnership with Dr. Garrett allows us both to continue our careers, to support each other's work, to share a home and life as equals. We are both brilliant physicians, both committed to advancing women's medical education, both determined to live on our own terms. What we have together is better than any marriage could be, intellectually stimulating, emotionally satisfying, and free from the legal and social subordination that marriage entails. I do not need a husband. I have chosen a different path, and I am happy with my choice. This letter, according to Professor Vicinis, articulates the new woman's conscious rejection of marriage in favour of female partnership based on a clear-eyed analysis of what each option would cost and offer. Dr. Jacobi's emphasis on maintaining her career, independence, and equality reveals that for professionally ambitious women, marriage posed a genuine threat to their life goals that partnership with another woman did not. The statement, "What we have together is better than any marriage could be," makes an explicit hierarchical claim asserting female partnership as superior to heterosexual marriage in meeting her needs. According to Professor Vasinus, such letters reveal that some late 19th century women understood romantic friendships not as failed attempts at heterosexual marriage, but as positive choices, as preferred ways of living that better suited their values and goals. Another New Woman letter from 1896 from journalist Ida Tarbell to her partner Josephine Morrison, analysed by Professor Vasinus and preserved at the Ida Tarbell collection, describes their domestic partnership with satisfaction and pride. Dearest Joe, I write to you from the office where I am working late on my latest article, but my thoughts are at home with you, imagining you reading by the fire in our sitting room, perhaps thinking of me as I am thinking of you. This life we have built together, this home we share, this partnership of equals, it brings me such contentment. We are both independent women with our own careers and interests, but we have chosen to intertwine our lives, to make a home together, to be companions and lovers. I know that society looks askance at women like us who choose not to marry, who make our lives with each other instead of with men, but I also know that we are happier, freer, more fulfilled than most married women of our acquaintance. We have created something new, a way of being women in the world that previous generations did not have access to. I am proud of us, proud of what we have built, proud to love you and be loved by you. This letter, according to Professor Vasinus, expresses pride in their alternative way of living, framing it as progressive, something new and superior to conventional marriage in terms of happiness, freedom and fulfillment. Ida's use of the word lovers is direct and unambiguous, naming the romantic and sexual nature of their relationship openly. Her awareness that society looks askance at women like us, combined with her assertion, I am proud of us, demonstrates defiance of social disapproval and confidence in the validity of their choice. According to Professor Vasinus, this kind of conscious pride in choosing female partnership over marriage became more common in the 1890s as communities of professional women developed in cities, and women had more models for alternative ways of living. Let me tell you about how the invention of the typewriter and women's entry into office work created new contexts for romantic friendships in the late 19th century. According to research by Professor Lisa Fine from Michigan State University, whose work on office workers examines their culture and relationships, the feminization of clerical work in the 1880s and 1890s brought young, unmarried women together in offices where they formed intense friendships that often had romantic dimensions. Letters between office workers reveal relationships that combined workplace camaraderie with deep emotional attachment and sometimes romantic love. A letter from 1894 from stenographer Alice Morrison to her colleague and friend Edith Palmer, analysed by Professor Fine and preserved in business history archives, describes the development of their friendship in the workplace. Dearest Edith, do you remember the day you started working at Thompson & Sons? How nervous you were, how I took you under my wing and showed you the ropes. That was 3 years ago, and now I cannot imagine the office or my life without you. We spend every working day together, sitting side by side at our desks, sharing our lunch hour, walking home together after work. But more than that, we have become intimate friends, confiding in each other our hopes and dreams, our frustrations and fears. You know me better than anyone, better even than my family knows me. Last week, when you were ill and missed several days of work, I was lost without you, counting the hours until you returned. The workday without you felt endless and empty. I love you, Edith, more than I should probably admit even to myself. You are my dearest friend, my constant companion, the person who makes my life worth living. This letter, according to Professor Fine, shows how workplace proximity could create intense intimacy, with daily contact and shared work experiences, building emotional bonds that deepened into romantic attachment. Alice's confession that she loves Edith more than I should probably admit suggests awareness that her feelings exceed conventional friendship, even as she struggles to name or define what they are. The transformation of workplace friendship into romantic love documented in this letter was common enough in office settings. According to Professor Fine, that managers sometimes worried about female workers becoming too attached to each other and potentially forming couple relationships that might lead them to leave work simultaneously if one left, disrupting business operations. Another office worker letter from 1897 from bookkeeper Margaret Sullivan to her former colleague and current partner Catherine Flynn, with whom she now lives, analysed by Professor Fine and preserved in Labour History archives, describes how their workplace friendship evolved into domestic partnership. My darling Kate, 2 years ago we were colleagues at the insurance company, friends who ate lunch together and shared confidences during our breaks. Today we share a home, a life, a partnership that means everything to me. When you proposed that we leave our jobs and use our savings to set up our own bookkeeping business together, to make our lives together permanently, I barely hesitated before saying yes. Working with you is one of the great joys of my life, but living with you is even better. Coming home each evening to you, sharing our meals and our evenings, sleeping in your arms each night. This is the life I was meant to live. I did not know such happiness was possible until I found you. We are partners in business and in life, and I could not ask for anything more. This letter, according to Professor Fine, documents a progression from workplace friendship to romantic partnership to domestic partnership and business partnership, with the two women creating an integrated life where personal and professional relationships were intertwined. Margaret's phrase, "sleeping in your arms each night," is sexually suggestive, indicating a physical as well as emotional relationship. The decision to leave wage work and establish an independent business together represents economic as well as romantic partnership, creating the financial independence that made their domestic partnership sustainable. According to Professor Fine, such arrangements were not uncommon among office workers who had gained skills and savings that allowed them to establish independent households and businesses with their romantic partners. Now, let me tell you about how letter writing materials and practices shaped women's romantic friendships in the 1800s. Because the physical act of writing letters was itself laden with meaning and ritual. According to research by Professor William Merrill Decker from Oklahoma State University, whose work on epistolary practices examines letter writing culture, the 19th century saw letter writing elevated to an art form, particularly among women, with elaborate conventions about paper choice, ink colour, handwriting style, and even the folding and sealing of letters, all carrying messages beyond the written words. Women's letters to their beloved friends often involved careful selection of special paper, perhaps scented or decorated, and hours of composition to create perfect expressions of their feelings. A letter from 1844 from Caroline Norton to her friend Mary Shelley, analysed by Professor Decker and preserved in the British Library, discusses the ritualistic aspects of their correspondence. "My dearest Mary, I have spent the entire afternoon composing this letter to you, choosing the finest paper I own. The blue that you once said reminded you of my eyes, mixing the ink to the exact shade of violet that you prefer, practicing my penmanship until every letter is perfectly formed. Writing to you is not merely communication, but an act of devotion, each word crafted with care, each sentence meant to please you and convey the depth of my affection. When you receive this letter, you will hold in your hands not just paper and ink, but hours of my time and thought, all dedicated to you. You will know that I sat at my desk thinking of you, imagining your face as you read my words, hoping they bring you some measure of the joy that your letters bring to me." This letter, according to Professor Decker, reveals how letter writing between romantic friends was understood as a form of gift, giving, and artistic creation, with the physical letter itself meant to be beautiful and precious as an expression of love. The care taken in selecting special blue paper and violet ink in perfecting penmanship transforms the act of writing from simple communication into ritual devotion. Caroline's awareness that Mary will hold the letter and know that it represents hours of devoted labour makes the physical object a kind of proxy for Caroline's presence and love. According to Professor Decker, women often saved letters from beloved friends for decades, treasuring them as precious objects as well as for their written content. Another letter from 1856 from Elizabeth Barrett Browning to her friend Mary Russell Mitford, analysed by Professor Decker and preserved at Wellesley College, describes saving and rereading old letters. Dear Mary, I have been going through old correspondence today, reading letters you wrote to me 20 years ago when we were both young women full of literary ambitions and romantic dreams. Holding these yellowed pages, seeing your handwriting, which has scarcely changed. My dear, I am transported back to those days when we poured our hearts out to each other in weekly letters that sustained us through loneliness and disappointment. I have saved every letter you ever sent me, and I confess I sometimes take them out and read them when I am feeling melancholy or lonely. And your words from decades past comfort me as much now as they did when first written. These letters are my treasure, more valuable to me than any material possession. They are evidence of a friendship that has spanned half our lives, of a love that has endured through marriages, separations, deaths, and all the changes that time brings. This letter, according to Professor Decker, reveals the practice of saving correspondence and the emotional value that old letters held as physical evidence of enduring love. Elizabeth's description of taking out old letters for comfort when feeling melancholy shows how women used letters not just as contemporary communication, but as lasting sources of emotional support. The characterization of letters as treasure, more valuable to me than any material possession, elevates correspondence above monetary value to something priceless and sacred. According to Professor Decker, the practice of saving letters from romantic friends was near universal among literate women in the 19th century, creating the archives that modern scholars have been able to study, though it also meant that women were acutely aware that their most intimate words might be read by others after their deaths. Let me tell you about the role of poetry and literary quotation in women's letters to each other, because educated women in the 1800s often enhanced their correspondence with verses from favourite poets or original poetry expressing their feelings. According to research by Professor Paula Bennett from Southern Illinois University, whose work on women's poetry examines love poems, women's letters frequently incorporated lines from Shakespeare, the Romantic poets, or classical literature to express emotions that might feel too bold if stated directly in prose. The use of quotation created a kind of emotional intensification while also providing plausible deniability. The writer was merely sharing beautiful poetry, not necessarily claiming the sentiments as her own authentic feelings, though both writer and recipient usually understood the quoted verses as expressing genuine emotion. A letter from 1835 from Lydia Maria Child to her friend Louisa Loring, analysed by Professor Bennett and preserved at the Boston Public Library, uses Shakespeare to express love. My dearest Louisa, I read Twelfth Night last evening and found in Viola's words the perfect expression of what I feel for you but dare not say in my own words. I am all the daughters of my father's house, Suvdine and all the brothers too, and yet I know not. This sense of being more than one thing, of loving in ways that have no clear name or category, of feeling emotions that society provides no framework for expressing. This is exactly my experience of loving you. You are my friend, my sister, my dearest companion, my what? There is no word in English for what you are to me, no category that captures it, so I borrow Shakespeare's words and hope you understand what I cannot quite say directly. I love you with a love that exceeds the bounds of conventional friendship, and I am grateful beyond words that you accept and perhaps reciprocate this love. This letter, according to Professor Bennett, uses Shakespeare as both permission and cover to express feelings that would be difficult to state directly, while the gloss that follows makes clear that Child is claiming the sentiment as her own. The acknowledgement that there is no word in English for what you are to me expresses the fundamental problem women faced in trying to name their romantic friendships. They had intense feelings that exceeded conventional categories, but lacked language to describe them accurately. The hope that Louisa will understand what I cannot quite say directly relies on shared literary knowledge and emotional understanding to communicate what cannot be stated explicitly. Another letter from 1867 from Christina Rossetti to her friend Caroline Gemma, analysed by Professor Bennett and preserved at Princeton University, includes original poetry expressing devotion. My dear Caroline, I have written a poem for you to express what prose cannot adequately convey. My heart is like a singing bird hired whose nest is in a watered shoot. My heart is like an apple tree whose boughs are bent with thick-set fruit. Fire, my heart is gladder than all these sign, because my love is come to me. This is how I feel when I see you, when I receive your letters, when I think of our friendship. My heart sings like a bird, bends with the weight of joy like a fruit-laden tree. You are my love in every sense that matters, and though the world might misunderstand or condemn what we are to each other, I know in my heart that this love is pure and blessed. This letter, according to Professor Bennett, includes verses from what would become one of Rossetti's most famous love poems, A Birthday, which she first sent to Caroline before publishing it years later. The direct address, "You are my love," claims the romantic language of the poem as applying specifically to Caroline, making this a love letter in poetry and prose combined. Rossetti's acknowledgement that the world might misunderstand or condemn what we are to each other shows awareness that their relationship could be seen as transgressive, but her assertion that she knows it is pure and true and blessed demonstrates her refusal to accept external judgment over her own understanding of the relationship's value. According to Professor Bennett, many of Rossetti's love poems were originally written for or about women she loved, though later readers often assumed they were about men or were purely abstract spiritual exercises. Now let me tell you about the anxiety and precautions that some women took in their letter writing, because awareness that letters might be read by unintended audiences sometimes shaped how women express their feelings. According to research by Professor Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick from Duke University, whose work on homosocial relationships examines coded communication, some 19th century women used coded language, inside jokes, and oblique references that would be opaque to outsiders but perfectly clear to their intended recipients. This kind of strategic opacity allowed women to express intimate feelings while protecting themselves from potential scandal if their letters were discovered by disapproving family members or fell into hostile hands. A letter from 1873 from one woman to another, with names redacted in the archive copy, analysed by Professor Sedgwick and preserved in a private collection, uses coded language throughout. My dear M, I received your letter containing news of our special project, and I am overjoyed that it progresses well. I hope we can meet soon to discuss business matters as we so productively did last month. The accounts we reviewed together brought me such satisfaction, and I long for another consultation. I have told my family I must travel to Boston for shopping, and I trust you will meet me there at our usual place. I count the days until we can be together again for our meeting. You know what I mean, my dear, even if I cannot write it more plainly. Yours in friendship and all that entails. This letter, according to Professor Sedgwick, uses quotation marks strategically to signal that the stated meaning, special project, busyness matters, shopping, is not the real meaning, creating a double language where innocent words mask romantic intent. The phrase, "You know what I mean, my dear," even if I cannot write it more plainly, explicitly acknowledges that the letter is written in code for protective purposes. The final "yours in friendship" and all that entails puts quotation marks around friendship to signal that the relationship is more than friendship, while maintaining the appearance of conventional propriety. According to Professor Sedgwick, such coded communication was necessary for some women whose families or social positions made open expression of romantic friendship too dangerous. Though the prevalence of such coding also means that modern scholars may miss romantic dimensions of relationships when the code is too subtle to detect. Another letter from 1881 from a woman writing to her beloved friend and explicitly discussing the need for discretion, analysed by Professor Sedgwick and preserved in university archives, reveals the challenges of writing under surveillance. My darling, I write to you from my sister's house where I am visiting, and I must be brief and guarded in my expressions, because my sister has the unfortunate habit of reading correspondence that is left lying about. She already suspects that our friendship is of an intensity she considers inappropriate, and I dare not give her further evidence to support her suspicions. Know that what I feel for you cannot be safely written here, cannot be put down in words that might be seen by hostile eyes. When we meet next week, I will tell you in person what I cannot write. I will show you rather than tell you, as words fail anyway to capture the depth of feeling I have for you. Until then, I remain your devoted friend, and you must read in that simple phrase all the love and longing that I dare not express more fully here. This letter, according to Professor Sedgwick, explicitly describes the constraints of writing under potential surveillance, with the writer unable to express her true feelings, because of fear that her sister might read the letter and use it as evidence against the friendship. The phrase, "our friendship is of an intensity she considers inappropriate," reveals awareness that the relationship exceeds conventional bounds and that this is a source of concern to family members. The promise to show you rather than tell you when they meet in person suggests physical expressions of love that cannot be described in writing. According to Professor Sedgwick, the necessity for such discretion varied enormously depending on women's particular family situations and social contexts, with some women able to write very openly about their loves, while others had to employ elaborate codes and euphemisms. Let me tell you about letters between African American women in the late 19th century, expanding beyond what you learned earlier about Addie Brown and Rebecca Primus. According to research by Professor Farah Jasmine Griffin from Columbia University, whose work on African American women's literature examines their relationships, the period after the Civil War saw expanding literacy among black women and the emergence of a black-educated middle class, creating new opportunities for romantic friendships to flourish and be documented in letters. Black women's romantic friendships often took place within communities shaped by experiences of slavery, Reconstruction, and racial violence, giving these relationships particular meanings and contexts that differed from white women's friendships. A letter from 1878 from Charlotte Fortin Grimp to her friend and probable lover, whose name is partially obscured in the surviving document, analysed by Professor Griffin and preserved at the Moreland Spingarn Research Centre, expresses love while also discussing racial justice. My dearest friend, I write to you from Philadelphia, where I have been attending meetings of our society for the advancement of our race. The work is important and necessary, but all through the long speeches and debates I found myself thinking of you, wishing you were beside me so we could share our thoughts about what was said. You are my intellectual companion as well as my heart's beloved, and I value your mind as much as I cherish your affection. Last night I dreamed we were working together, teaching freed children in the South, as we once planned, living in the same house, dedicating our lives to the uplift of our people and to each other. Is this dream possible? Could we make this life together? I want nothing more than to spend my life by your side, working for justice and loving you. Tell me you want this too. This letter, according to Professor Griffin, combines romantic love with political commitment, showing how black women's friendships were often grounded in shared dedication to racial justice and community advancement. Charlotte's vision of a shared future that encompasses both the uplift of our people and loving each other reveals how political and personal goals were intertwined. The question, is this dream possible, suggests uncertainty about whether two black women could actually build a life together in the hostile racial climate of the late 19th century, where economic precarity and racial violence made independence and security particularly difficult to achieve. According to Professor Griffin, black women's romantic friendships had to navigate not only the challenges that all women faced in maintaining same-sex relationships, but also the additional burdens of racism and economic marginalization. Another letter from 1893 from Mary Church Terrell to her close friend and former college roommate, analysed by Professor Griffin and preserved at the Library of Congress, reflects on how their friendship sustained them both. My dear friend, As I look back on our years together at Oberlin, I realise more and more how precious that time was. How our friendship was the foundation that allowed both of us to become the women we are today. We supported each other through struggles that our white classmates could never understand. The daily humiliations of racism, the weight of representing our race, the pressure to excel beyond any possible criticism. But more than just support, we loved each other, and that love gave us strength. I remember lying in our shared bed, holding each other through nights when the burden felt too heavy to bear, and feeling that as long as we had each other, we could survive anything. That closeness, that intimacy was essential to me then, and the memory of it sustains me still. You were my first love, and though our lives have taken different paths, you remain in my heart always. This letter, according to Professor Griffin, explicitly describes bed sharing and physical comfort, while also contextualizing the relationship within the specific challenges that black women faced in predominantly white educational institutions. Mary's characterization of their friendship as providing strength to survive racism emphasizes how romantic friendships between black women could be survival mechanisms, as well as sources of personal joy. The phrase, "You were my first love," is direct and unambiguous, claiming the relationship as romantic even decades after it occurred. According to Professor Griffin, black women's romantic friendships at institutions like Oberlin were crucial support networks that enabled them to persist in hostile environments, with emotional and physical intimacy, providing respite from the daily struggles of navigating white-dominated spaces. Now, let me tell you about the phenomenon of women's clubs and organizations in the late 19th century as sites for romantic friendship formation. According to research by Professor Anne Ruggles-Gare from the University of Michigan, whose work on women's voluntary associations examines their social dynamics, the explosion of women's literary clubs, reform societies and professional organizations in the 1880s and 1890s brought together women with shared interests and values, creating communities where romantic friendships could develop between women who might never have met otherwise. Letters between women who met through clubs and organizations document how shared intellectual or political work often led to intense personal bonds. A letter from 1886 from Jane Addams to her lifelong companion, Mary Rosette Smith, whom she met through settlement housework, analysed by Professor Gia and preserved at the Jane Addams Papers Project, describes the evolution of their relationship from professional collaboration to romantic partnership. Dearest Mary, when we first met 2 years ago at that meeting about establishing Hull House, I knew immediately that you were someone special, someone I wanted to know better. As we worked together to make the settlement house a reality, sharing ideas and effort and dedication to serving the poor, I came to admire your intelligence, your compassion, your tireless energy. But admiration deepened into something more, something I had not expected and cannot now imagine living without. I love you, Mary, not just as a colleague or a friend, but as a romantic partner, as someone I want to share my whole life with. You have become essential to me, and I hope I have become essential to you. Will you consider making our partnership permanent, not just in our settlement work, but in our personal lives? Will you make your home with me? This letter, according to Professor Gia, documents Jane Addams proposing a committed partnership with Mary Rosette Smith, explicitly framing it as romantic, as a romantic partner, and comprehensive, share my whole life with. The progression from professional respect to romantic love reveals how shared values and work created contexts for deep emotional bonds to develop. Jane's proposal that Mary make your home with me is the equivalent of a marriage proposal, seeking a permanent domestic partnership alongside their continued professional collaboration. According to Professor Gia, Mary accepted, and the two women lived together for over 40 years in a relationship that was recognized by their social circle as a committed partnership, though publicly described in the safer language of friendship and professional collaboration. Another letter from women's club culture from 1891, from a cirrhosis club member to her friend whom she met at club meetings, analysed by Professor Gia and preserved in club archives, shows how regular meetings created opportunities for courtship. My dear Julia, I confess that I attend our weekly cirrhosis meetings less for the literary discussions, though they are enriching, and more for the opportunity to see you, to hear your voice, to steal glances at you when you are absorbed in conversation with others. Last week, when our eyes met across the room during Mrs. Henderson's presentation on the Brontes, I felt such a jolt of connection that I nearly forgot where I was. After the meeting, when you asked if I would walk home with you, I was overjoyed, and our conversation during that walk was the highlight of my week. You said you felt we have a special connection, and I want you to know that I feel it too, so strongly that I think of little else. Might we meet outside of club meetings? Might we deepen this connection in private? I would very much like to know you better, to spend time with just you, without the distraction of club business. I hope I am not being too forward in expressing this. This letter, according to Professor Gay, describes courtship behaviour within the context of regular club meetings, with the writer using the club as an excuse to see Julia weekly while hoping to develop their relationship beyond the organisational setting. The language of special connection and the desire to deepen this connection in private makes romantic interest clear while maintaining enough ambiguity to allow retreat if Julia does not reciprocate. The nervousness evident in "I hope I am not being too forward" suggests uncertainty about whether Julia shares her romantic feelings or sees their connection as purely friendly. According to Professor Gear, women's organisations created structured social opportunities for women to meet each other regularly, functioning somewhat like the mixed-gender social events that facilitated heterosexual courtship, but exclusively among women. Let me tell you about how seasonal separations affected women's romantic friendships, because upper and middle-class social patterns in the 19th century often involved extended periods spent in different locations. According to research by Professor Jan Lewis from Rutgers University, whose work on early American families examines seasonal mobility patterns, families often spent summers in country estates or resort towns and winters in cities, or travelled for months visiting relatives, creating regular separations between romantic friends that generated extensive correspondence. Letters written during these seasonal separations express intense longing for reunion and document how couples planned their lives around opportunities to be together. A letter from 1853 from one woman to another, both members of wealthy Boston families, analysed by Professor Lewis and preserved at the Massachusetts Historical Society, expresses frustration at seasonal separation. "My beloved, I am writing this from our summer house in Newport, where my family has insisted I spend the season. Though my heart remains in Boston with you, the ocean is beautiful, the weather pleasant, the company agreeable, and I am miserable because you are not here. My mother cannot understand why I am so melancholy when she has arranged for me to attend parties and balls where I might meet eligible young men. If she only knew that the only person I wish to meet is you, that the only dancing I want to do is in your arms, that marriage to any man holds no appeal when all I want is to be with you. How many more summers must we endure these separations? When we are both of age and in control of our own movements, I swear we will never be apart for more than a day. I count the weeks until September when I return to Boston, and we can be together again. Write to me often, my love, as your letters are my only comfort in this exile from you." This letter, according to Professor Lewis, reveals the particular frustration of women whose romantic relationships were not recognised by their families as legitimate reasons to avoid separation. The writer's mother's incomprehension at her melancholy, attributing it to lack of male romantic prospects rather than separation from her female beloved, highlights how romantic friendships between women were often invisible to families or dismissed as less important than potential heterosexual courtships. The promise, "When we are both of age and in control of our own movements, we will never be apart," expresses the common fantasy among romantic friends that financial and legal independence would allow them to live together permanently, free from family interference. Another letter about seasonal separation from 1869 from a young woman travelling in Europe with her family to her friend, who remained in New York, analysed by Professor Lewis and preserved in private family papers, describes the pain of being apart. Darling Sophia, I am writing to you from Florence, where my family has dragged me on this endless grand tour that I never wanted. They think I should be grateful for the opportunity to see the great art and architecture of Europe, and perhaps I would be if you were here with me to share it. But experiencing beautiful things alone, or rather with family members who do not understand me, only makes me feel your absence more acutely. When I stand before magnificent paintings, I think Sophia would love this, and wish desperately that you were beside me so we could appreciate it together. At night, when I write in my journal, I am really writing to you, recording everything I see and think so I can share it with you when I return. 6 months we will be apart, 6 endless months when all I want is to be home with you. I love you more than any painting, more than any cathedral, more than all the treasures of Europe combined. You are my treasure, and I am lost without you. This letter, according to Professor Lewis, expresses how separation transformed what should have been a privileged and exciting experience, the grand tour, into a miserable ordeal, because the writer's beloved was not there to share it. The characterization of keeping a journal as really writing to reveals how separation often generated extensive written documentation of daily life and feelings that might not have been recorded if the women were together. The hyperbolic declaration that the writer loves Sophia more than all the treasures of Europe is both romantic excess and genuine expression of how much she values the relationship over cultural enrichment. According to Professor Lewis, extended separations like the Grand Tour often tested romantic friendships, but also generated the most passionate and revealing correspondence, as women tried to maintain connection across distance and time. Now, let me tell you about the role of illness and nursing in intensifying romantic friendships in the 1800s. According to research by Professor Charles Rosenberg from the University of Pennsylvania, whose work on 19th century medicine examines home nursing practices, women regularly cared for sick friends in an era when most illness was treated at home rather than in hospitals. Extended periods of nursing created situations of enforced intimacy and physical contact that could intensify existing friendships or create new bonds. Letters written during or after nursing. A sick friend often expressed love intensified by the fear of loss and the physical intimacy of caregiving. A letter from 1847 from Elizabeth Cady Stanton to her friend Susan B. Anthony, after nursing her through illness, analysed by Professor Rosenberg and preserved at the Library of Congress, expresses devotion deepened by illness. My dear Susan, now that you are recovering and I can leave your bedside for a few hours to attend to neglected correspondence, I want to write to you while you rest and tell you what I could not say while you were delirious with fever. For 3 weeks I have sat beside you, bathing your forehead, spooning broth into your mouth, changing your sweat-soaked nightgowns, watching you struggle for every breath, and I have never felt closer to another human being or more terrified of loss. When the doctor said you might not survive, I felt as though my own life was ending. I realized that you are essential to me, not just as a colleague in our work for women's rights, but as my dearest friend, my most beloved companion, the person I cannot imagine living without. Sitting beside you hour after hour, holding your hand, willing you to live, I felt such overwhelming love for you. Now that you are recovering, I feel as though I have been given a second chance to tell you what you mean to me, to show you how much I love you. We must never take our time together for granted, must never waste a moment of the precious gift of each other's company. This letter, according to Professor Rosenberg, shows how the crisis of illness stripped away conventional reserve and allowed deeper feelings to surface. Elizabeth's description of the physical intimacy of nursing bathing Susan's forehead, changing her nightgowns, holding her hand through delirium, suggests a level of bodily intimacy that was permitted and even expected in nursing contexts, but that also created or intensified romantic bonds. The realization, you are essential to me, and I cannot imagine living without you expresses dependence and love in terms usually reserved for the most intimate relationships. According to Professor Rosenberg, illness and nursing were common experiences in the 19th century, when disease was frequent and often fatal, and many romantic friendships were tested and transformed by these experiences of shared vulnerability and caregiving. Another letter about nursing from 1859 from Florence Nightingale to her friend and probable lover Mary Clark Mole, analysed by Professor Rosenberg and preserved in the British Library, discusses how nursing reveals character and deepens love. Dearest Mary, you ask me why I feel such devotion to nursing, why I have dedicated my life to this work despite my family's opposition and society's disapproval. Part of the answer is that nursing is where I have seen human nature at its finest, where I have witnessed women caring for each other with a selflessness and tenderness that moves me to tears. During the Crimean War, I watched women nurse their friends and companions through terrible wounds and diseases, sitting vigil for days without sleep, sharing their own rations with the sick, grieving lost comrades as widows grieve husbands. There is something profoundly intimate about caring for a sick beloved, about tending to their most basic bodily needs, about the trust that exists between nurse and patient. I have nursed you through your illnesses, and you have nursed me through mine, and these experiences have bound us together more tightly than any marriage vows could. When you are vulnerable and dependent, when I see you stripped of social pretense by fever and pain, I love you most intensely. Nursing is love made visible, made practical, made bodily, and our history of caring for each other is the history of our love. This letter, according to Professor Rosenberg, explicitly connects nursing to love, describing the act of physical caregiving as an expression and intensification of romantic attachment. Florence's observation that nursing is love made visible, made practical, made bodily, articulates how the abstract emotion of love becomes concrete through the physical acts of caring for someone's sick body. The comparison to marriage vows bound us together more tightly than any marriage vows could, claims that shared experiences of nursing have created bonds equivalent to or stronger than legal marriage. According to Professor Rosenberg, the physical intimacy required in nursing gave women access to each other's bodies in ways that were otherwise forbidden or unusual, creating opportunities for touch and care that could be deeply erotic, even when framed as purely medical necessity. Let me tell you about letters written by women facing death, because terminal illness often prompted women to write final letters to their beloved friends expressing love that might have been more guarded during life. According to research by Professor Patricia Jalland from the Australian National University, whose work on Victorian death examines deathbed practices, the 19th century had very different attitudes toward death than our own time, with death often occurring at home surrounded by family and friends. Women dying from tuberculosis, childbirth complications, or other diseases sometimes had weeks or months of decline, during which they wrote farewell letters to those they loved most. Letters that often expressed feelings with a directness enabled by the knowledge that death was imminent. A letter from 1861 from a young woman dying of consumption to her romantic friend, preserved in a private collection and analysed by Professor Jalland, expresses love freed from conventional constraints by approaching death. My dearest love, the doctor has told me I have perhaps a month, remaining perhaps less, and I find that the imminence of death gives me courage to write what I might have been too timid to express if I expected to live. I love you. I have loved you since we were girls together, and I will love you until my dying breath, and beyond if there is an afterlife where souls can still love. Ours has been more than friendship, though we have called it friendship for propriety's sake. We have been lovers in every way that matters, in heart and mind and soul, and I believe in body too, though we have never named those intimate moments when we held each other through the night as anything but innocent comfort. I want you to know, before I die, that loving you has been the greatest joy of my life, greater than anything else I have experienced or accomplished. If I have any regret, it is only that we did not have more time, that I must leave you now when we are both so young, when we had planned for decades together. Promise me that you will remember me, that you will know you were loved completely and truly, and that you will find happiness again. even though I will not be there to share it with you. I will wait for you in whatever world comes next, and we will be together again someday, never to be parted. This letter, according to Professor Jalland, shows how approaching death removed constraints on expression, allowing the dying woman to name their relationship openly as love and to refer directly to physical intimacy that was never named as anything but innocent comfort during life. The promise to wait in the afterlife for reunion reflects common Victorian beliefs about death and heavenly reunion that women often applied to their romantic friendships, imagining that death would unite them permanently in ways that earthly life had not allowed. The request that her friend remember me and know you were loved completely emphasizes the importance of being remembered as having loved and been loved, claiming posthumous recognition for a relationship that might not have been fully acknowledged during life. According to Professor Jalland, deathbed letters like this one were often treasured by survivors for decades and sometimes preserved carefully as sacred relics of the deceased beloved. Another deathbed letter from 1875 from a woman dying of typhoid fever to her friend with whom she had hoped to make a life, analysed by Professor Jalland and preserved in state archives, expresses grief at lost possibilities. My darling, as I lie here dying, all I can think about is our lost future, all the plans we made that will never come to pass. We were going to live together, grow old together, support each other through all of life's trials and joys. We were going to travel to Europe, open our own school, make a home filled with books and art and love. And now I am dying at 35, and none of it will happen, and you will have to live that life without me, or perhaps not at all. This is the cruelest part of dying, not death itself, but the knowledge of what I am losing, what we are both losing. I am losing the decades I should have had with you, the ordinary daily intimacy of shared life, the accumulation of small moments that make up love across years. You are losing me when you should not have had to, when we should have had another 40 years together. I want you to promise me something if you can. Find love again. Find another woman to share your life with, to make those plans come true with. I know this is hard to imagine now, but please try. You deserve love and companionship, and I cannot bear the thought of you being alone for the rest of your life because I died too soon. But even if you find love again, remember that I loved you first and best, and that part of your heart will always be mine. This letter, according to Professor Jalland, is particularly poignant in its focus on lost future rather than past shared experiences, grieving for the life they had planned but will never live together. The specific plans mentioned, living together, travelling, opening a school, making a home, reveal how concrete their vision of shared future had been, making the loss more painful because it was not just an abstract relationship, but a detailed life plan that is now impossible. The dying woman's advice that her friend find love again with another woman is remarkably direct in assuming that the friend will naturally seek romantic partnership with women, rather than considering marriage to a man, treating female romantic partnership as the default assumption for how her friend will live after her death. According to Professor Jalland, survivors of such relationships often did remain unmarried and either lived alone or eventually formed new partnerships with other women, honouring both the lost beloved and their own need for companionship. Now let me tell you about how religious belief and spiritual language shaped women's romantic friendships throughout the 1800s. According to research by Professor Phyllis Mack from Rutgers University, whose work on women and religion examines spiritual expression, many women understood and articulated their romantic friendships in religious terms, seeing their love as blessed by God, describing their feelings as sacred devotion, and using biblical and liturgical language to express what they felt. This religious framing both intensified the relationships, giving them transcendent significance, and protected them from secular criticism, since love understood as spiritual could claim to be pure regardless of its intensity or physical manifestations. A letter from 1836 from Sarah Grimp to her friend Harriet Hunt, analysed by Professor Mack and preserved at the American Antiquarian Society, uses explicitly religious language to describe their friendship. My beloved sister in Christ, I write to tell you that my love for you is not merely human affection, but a spiritual bond blessed by God. When I pray, I thank God for bringing you into my life. When I read scripture, I see our friendship reflected in the love between Ruth and Naomi, between David and Jonathan, in Christ's command that we love one another. Our souls are knit together as the souls of biblical companions were knit together, and I believe this sacred bond will endure not only through this earthly life but into eternity. God has given you to me as a gift, as a companion for my soul's journey, and I cherish my own salvation. Our love is holy because it draws us both closer to God, makes us both better and more devoted Christians, and expresses in human relationship the divine love that God has for all creation. This letter, according to Professor Mack, frames romantic friendship entirely within Christian theological language, claiming divine sanction and spiritual significance for the relationship. The comparison to biblical friendships was common among Christian women, with Ruth and Naomi and David and Jonathan being particularly frequent reference points because of the explicit biblical language about souls being knit together and loving more than women. Sarah's assertion that their love draws us both closer to God makes the relationship not only compatible with Christian faith, but actively religious, an expression of divine love in human form. According to Professor Mack, this religious framing was sincere rather than merely strategic cover, with many devout women genuinely experiencing their romantic friendships as spiritual relationships that enhanced their faith and brought them closer to God. Another religiously framed letter from 1869 from a Quaker woman to her romantic friend, who was also Quaker, analysed by Professor Mack and preserved in Quaker archives, uses the distinctive language of friends to describe their love. Dearest friend, when we sat together in meeting yesterday and the Spirit moved through the silence, I felt such powerful unity with thee, such sense of our souls being joined in divine light, that I nearly wept with the beauty of it. In the Quaker understanding, we are all equal before God, all containing the inner light, and in thee I see that light shining with particular brightness and beauty. Loving thee is a form of worship, recognizing God's presence in thee, honoring the divine that dwells in thy soul. When we hold each other, I believe we are holding the sacred. When we exchange words of love, I believe we are speaking truth, as God gives us to see truth. Our love needs no sanction from the world because it has sanction from God, and what God has blessed, no human authority can condemn as wrong. I am convinced in my conscience that loving thee is right and good and holy, and I will not be moved from this conviction. This letter, according to Professor Mack, uses distinctively Quaker theological concepts, the inner light, speaking truth, following conscience, to defend and sanctify the romantic relationship. The assertion that loving thee is a form of worship claims the highest religious significance for romantic love, making it not just compatible with but identical to religious devotion. The statement, what God has blessed, no human authority can condemn, takes a defiant stance against potential criticism, prioritizing direct divine revelation over human social norms. According to Professor Mack, Quaker women's emphasis on individual conscience and direct access to God without clerical intermediaries sometimes gave them more confidence to assert the validity of romantic friendships than women in more hierarchical religious traditions, since they could claim to know God's will through their own inner light rather than having to defer to external religious authorities. Let me tell you about how women's education transformed romantic friendships in the late 19th century, because the expansion of women's colleges and academies created unprecedented opportunities for educated women to live together in communities of their peers. According to research by Professor Lynn Gordon from the University of Rochester, whose work on women's higher education examines campus culture, colleges like Vassar, Smith, Wellesley, Bryn Mawr, and Mount Holyoke created what were essentially women-only societies where romantic friendships flourished with institutional knowledge and often tacit approval. Faculty members as well as students formed romantic partnerships, creating role models for younger women of how to live as committed couples. within academic settings. A letter from 1889 from Catherine Lee Bates, professor at Wellesley College, to her colleague and partner Catherine Coman, analysed by Professor Gordon and preserved in Wellesley archives, describes their life together in the Wellesley community. My dearest Catherine, how fortunate we are to have found each other and to live in a community that allows us to be together openly, walking across campus together, attending faculty meetings side by side, returning each evening to the home we share. We live as married couples live, with all the domesticity and partnership that entails, and our colleagues treat our relationship with the respect and recognition it deserves. Our students see in us a model of female partnership, of two women building careers and a life together, and I believe we show them possibilities for their own futures that their mothers never had. We are privileged to love openly in a world that still condemns such love elsewhere. Wellesley is our sanctuary, and I thank God daily for this place, and for you. This letter, according to Professor Gordon, reveals how women's colleges could function as protective spaces where romantic partnerships between women could be lived with a degree of openness impossible in the wider world. Catherine Bates's characterization of their relationship as being like marriage, with all the domesticity and partnership that entails, claims full equivalence between their partnership and heterosexual marriage. Her awareness that they serve as a model of female partnership for students indicates consciousness that their relationship had pedagogical significance beyond their personal lives, teaching students that women could build independent lives together. According to Professor Gordon, many women's colleges in the late 19th and early 20th centuries had significant numbers of faculty in committed partnerships with each other, creating lesbian-friendly environments that some scholars have called woman's worlds or Wellesley marriages. Another letter from Women's College Culture from 1892 from M. Carey Thomas, president of Bryn Mawr College, to her partner Mary Garrett, analysed by Professor Gordon and preserved in Bryn Mawr archives, discusses their partnership in business-like terms. Dearest Mary, I am writing to confirm the arrangements we discussed for managing our joint household finances, now that we have fully merged our lives together. You contribute income from your inheritance, I contribute my presidential salary, and we share all expenses equally. We will make all major decisions jointly as equal partners in our domestic and financial affairs as we are equal partners in our hearts. I want to ensure that our partnership is organised rationally and equitably, that neither of us is subordinate to or dependent on the other. This is what marriage should be. Equal partnership between two people who respect each other intellectually and emotionally, who support each other's ambitions, who share resources and decision, making power fairly. Our partnership is superior to most legal marriages precisely because it is chosen daily, negotiated consciously, and based on equality rather than on legal subordination. This letter, according to Professor Gordon, reveals how some educated, financially independent women in the late 19th century consciously designed their partnerships to embody egalitarian principles that they saw as superior to conventional marriage. Carey Thomas's emphasis on equal financial contribution, joint decision-making, and avoiding dependency reflects both feminist critique of marriage's legal subordination of wives and commitment to building a relationship based on different principles. The characterization of their partnership as superior to most legal marriages explicitly claims that female romantic partnerships could be more equitable and fulfilling than heterosexual marriages. According to Professor Gordon, women's college presidents and professors in romantic partnerships often had the financial resources and social position to live quite openly with their partners, creating visible models of alternative family structures. And may you remember, as you drift into dreams, that behind every historical letter there was a woman with a racing heart, a trembling hand, and feelings so strong that she had to write them down even at the risk of discovery. That these were real people who loved as intensely as you have ever loved or hoped to love. That their relationships were as complex and beautiful and sometimes difficult as any relationship you've experienced. and that their letters survive as evidence that love finds a way to express itself even in the most constrained circumstances, even when the world offers no name for what you feel, even when you have to invent your own language to capture the truth of your heart. Sweet dreams, dear friends, and may your own love letters, whether written or unwritten, spoken or silent, be as honest and brave and beautiful as the letters these remarkable women left behind.